Morning. It's Friday, September 4th, 2020. The State Board of Education meeting, live internet broadcast will be available through the State Board of Education website. Agenda item 1, call to order. I just want you all to know that John Witzel and Patricia Tim contacted me in advance to let you know that they would be absent from today's meeting. Would you call the order, Andrea?
Deborah Neary.
Here.
Patsy Kojons.
Here.
Lisa Fricke.
Here.
Maureen Nichols.
Here.
Rachel Wise.
Here.
Robin Stevens.
Here.
Patricia Tim. John Witzel. Commissioner Bloomstead.
Present.
7
Okay.
present, 2 absent.
Okay, thank you. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted as you enter the room from the main hallway. The Open Meetings Act is also posted on the State Board of Education's website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Board members, please engage your microphones before speaking and turn them off when you are done speaking. And please turn off your cell phones. Thank you. Agenda item 1.4, COVID-19 meeting protocol. Ryan?
So we have the same protocol as last time. Board members, you're familiar with that, and that was sent to you, was reviewed by the Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department. Hopefully you took the self-screen questionnaire and were able to answer no to each of those items. We've doubled our participation at this month's meeting from the public, and so I'd ask the public to take a look at the protocol and the questionnaire as well. I think we're in good shape for today. And Commissioner, I'm going to bring you a public comment card.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks. Agenda item 2. We will now have public comment. This period of public comment is available for any person who wishes to address the State Board on subjects within its authority. Please note that public comment should be on topics related to the State Board's constitutional and statutory authority. Thanks to the members of the public who have attended today. We have no 10-minute special appearances today. We will now move to our 5-minute public comment period. I would like to remind you to please sign in if you have not already done so. There are sign-in cards on the table outside of the meeting room. And we have one public comment card turned in, and that individual is Jeremy Eckler. I hope I didn't mess that up too bad.
Scrambling. So, my name is Jeremy Eckler. I am the new Associate Director for Education Policy at the Nebraska Catholic Conference, and I wanted to come here today just to thank you for your good work, to introduce myself to you, and also to say I really look forward to the partnership of our work educating all children in the state of Nebraska. I think the work you do, sorry my glasses keep clogging up. The work you do is so vital. The work we do for all children is so vital, and I think the pandemic has really put that in an interesting light where we're appreciating relationships, appreciating the work our educators do for children so much more. The comments that Commissioner Bloomstead has made about educating every child, supporting every child in every environment has been really important to us and meant a lot to us in our Catholic schools. I want to thank you for that and thank the board for their great work. But more than anything, hopefully put a face to a name as we work together in the coming years. I've been on the job for 5 weeks, so I haven't had a chance to get around and meet everybody yet. but I thought this would be a great forum, so I appreciate the opportunity to sit in and to introduce myself today. That's really all I wanted to bring to you, so thank you, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you for coming and
Absolutely.
speaking. Agenda item 3, the Commissioner's Report. Commissioner Bloomstead?
Yes, and I will do something a little bit different today, and I don't normally do this, but I do have a PowerPoint, and I think Ryan's going to help me out by posting that anyway. What I hope to be able to do, actually, I'm just going to say, because I had the opportunity to be observe you from afar from last meeting, and first of all, thanks for your efforts to kind of be organized in a different setting and juggling all the different things that we have. But I think one thing I kind of realized watching from afar, and maybe something I can be helpful with in my role as we kind of go forward, this review of the agenda, as we've kind of changed different processes, I might want to just highlight some things that I think are on the agenda that will be worth talking about as we go through the agenda. And then I do have some other reports, and I know Lane's going to join for a report as well. But I guess I'll start out with the routine part, though, the consent agenda. And obviously, if anyone's requested, I don't think we've had any requests to remove anything, so that process is kind of our typical approach, that obviously you can request to remove something, but so far we've not had anything that's been requested to be removed from the consent agenda. But I wanted to walk through the agenda as we have it today, and we're going to have obviously our regular standing committee reports from each of our committees, and I think helpful today to kind of think about what those conversations might look like as we go forward. Obviously, the report from the policy committee, not having Pat Tim here, I think Lisa's going to deliver that kind of report, but important things on there, like just the number of policies that are under review on a regular basis is important, and I want the board to be able to kind of ask questions or have that dialogue. And if you have those things that you're looking at, I think we had the meeting calendar. I wasn't part of the committee meeting, so I don't know all the dialogue, but I look forward to that, and thanks for the policy committee's work. I put up there, as the legislative committee, I know Robin will be reporting, I call this a review of the longest short session ever. So I know that the committee's done quite a bit of work, and look forward to those conversations. Teaching, learning, and serving, I think a big part of this will be the assessment, the work that we're going to do on assessment. And so encourage your kind of dialogue. I think I'll share a couple slides out of that conversation that we had yesterday on assessment direction, so we can have a dialogue there. The success, access, and support, and really the equity effort. So I think there's going to be some great opportunity to discuss where the board wants to go on equity, and I appreciate that. Budget and financing, you're going to see quite a bit of detail. Jen Udemark's going to present the biennial budget, and I know the budget committee had a great conversation yesterday, so we'll look forward to that. And then with strategic planning, we talked Rule 10, but it really gives us a chance to kind of engage a little bit of where the board wants to go, and what our next efforts are on Rule 10, but generally strategic plan and other things. And so I think it gives us a good opportunity to dialogue on those fronts. And then, last I'll mention the DHHS agreement for what we're providing for leadership in our partnership with DHHS and what that contract is. And so that'll be a bit of another topic that I want folks' attention to, and obviously ask your questions. This is a good chance to kind of get some of that out there for our conversation. So that's my quick overview of but again, I do think, and I hope anyway, that kind of as we work on these formats, this gives us a better chance to be able to ensure that we get some of that important dialogue out. And there's a lot to talk about, so but don't be afraid to do that. And I appreciate kind of where the committees have continued to have that deep, meaningful dialogue, and this is our chance kind of collectively as a full board to do that work too. So beyond that, I have a report on rules. We have Rule 21 and 24 that are up, or actually have been reviewed by the AG, and that actually they're awaiting the governor's approval. I think it was just on August 18th, I think, that they were approved by the AG. So there's a written report on those two topics as well. And then I know we got a point of board operations. I don't know if Ryan was going to come up for this. Just the NASB, you want to come up and talk about that just briefly, and appreciate that.
So did post in Spark the NASB delegate assembly information. And Maureen might speak later to her intentions around appointments for who will represent Nebraska, but I would encourage each of you to review those policies and then share back with whoever the delegate is to represent Nebraska your thoughts around that. An important part of being part of that association and organization, of course, the delegate assembly is part of the NASB conference that's taking place in October that we spoke about last month.
So, thanks, Ryan. And I'll let him advance the next slide. The next thing on the agenda that I had for a report for you is just a little bit of an update on the start of the school year. And I want to give you kind of my impressions of where we're at, and I think it'll kind of flow as I go through the next couple of slides. But obviously, as the school year started, school districts have done actually a tremendous amount of work. Teachers have done a tremendous amount of work. Administrators have, everyone across the system, with really this intention and focus on keeping students and staff safe in these environments. And so you've seen we have a mix of kind of different things that are taking place across the state, and a mix of in-person and a mix of remote. And in each case, I think what I'm hoping anyway, that we continue to learn from the best of what's happening and also adjust for the things that aren't working as well. And so I think it's really encouraging, at least, that we're at this moment in time, and we're approaching Labor Day weekend. And for the most part, I'm very proud of the efforts that have taken place, proud of the hard work that's gone into this. And I've seen schools meet with the challenges as they have positive cases, and it is a challenge. It's really a challenge to figure out how we sustain the operations of schools, how we keep an environment that's going that is healthy. And I think our focus on those healthy environments and learning a whole set of new protocols, relative to what will work in classrooms and what will work in schools and hallways and lunchrooms, has been tremendous. And I compliment our team on what they've done on Launch Nebraska to kind of anticipate some of those things, but also compliment schools that have really worked very hard, rolled up sleeves, and figured out how to do that well. But we keep improving on those fronts as well. We keep learning as we go. And I think I tweeted out this morning. I think I tweeted out like about 3 weeks ago about what's going to make this school year successful. And I think I said the top 5 things: teachers, 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 teachers. And then I said, and lots of other good, work and efforts. Well, today I kind of tweeted out something to the effect of, it's not just those things, but I'd add to the list, teachers' spirit, teachers' bravery, teachers' love of students, teachers, and again, that is going to be critical for our ongoing work. So I just say to the field, I think it's amazing what you're doing and trying to balance right now. And so I really wanted to share that with you. And then I think as we keep going, really now thinking not beyond the health, right? What are the best educational practices that we can have? And we've been fortunate to continue to have conversations with leaders across the state. And if I know John Scrett is here, I hope he doesn't mind calling, but I think just something even that we mentioned just now, we haven't been able to have the conversations about instructional practice the way that we normally would, right? And the improvements that take place in a school setting. There's been so much of the distraction of the rest. And so it's really time that we provide some chance and opportunity and leadership in those spaces. And a lot of what our staff has done over time was really focusing on, I put this graphic there, but it's from our website, really that we have these foundational ideals of, safe and transparent, equitable, and decisive. Well, the other part of this graphic that I think is so important is if Plan A doesn't work, think about Plan B and keep learning, right? Our continuous improvement model is absolutely critical in this time. So we'll keep working on that, keep thinking about those types of things. And really that leads me to the next slide, where I wanted to talk, I think, about the importance of us getting to a point where we're providing specific guidance. And the commissioner's guidance is what I want to call it, I guess, for this moment in time. what I think we've learned, we've given general flexibilities, and I just want to highlight that, and I think that's been good, right? And I think we've experienced it as a board too, and in our role, when we go back to Rule 62 and the declaratory order that we put in place, the idea was to signal that we were going to give flexibility to schools. With flexibility comes another challenge, though, because there's not a path always, or a clear path for schools on what decisions could be made, should be made, and people can't anticipate everything, right? But collectively, what I would like to see, and what I hope we're able to do with this type of guidance, is begin to be specific about things that we think are best practices, or examples of best practices that could be done for ensuring that process. Now, we asked schools in the mad scramble that we had to have in the spring to move to remote learning, and every school across the state did something and address those needs. Well, we have to continue to learn from what happened at that time. And I think our approach at that time was to ask schools, hey, look, how are you going to continue your learning? What's your continuity of learning plan? How are you going to address students with disabilities and special needs? How are you going to address the challenges that we have? And there was a lot learned. And I actually think I've heard from parents about the remote learning environments that some are much better, but some are yet still needing some development and some work. And so how can we begin to provide additional guidance that helps folks? And again, I'm not here to be in a position, I think, with this guidance. It's us helping kind of go through that together with our schools, ensuring that we're providing additional guidance. And we've provided a lot with Launch Nebraska, but this gives us a chance to kind of specify some things and be able to keep going there. And again, I guess what I'd say is addressing flexibility, but also managing this set of expectations and having expectations for learning in the classroom and having expectations for improving instructional practice. And I think there's some flexibilities that I've had a chance to meet with a group of teachers. We've set up a teacher advisory group, and I'm fascinated by what I'm hearing. And so I really, in fact, we're learning many things that I suspect will maintain long after this pandemic. But listening directly to teachers and the concerns about, I'm going to call it a simple thing, but it's not a simple thing. But if you're a kindergarten teacher and having to clean, several times a day, all the different surfaces, and keep kindergarten students, kind of lined up in different ways to ensure their safety, yet at the same moment in time, questioning whether or not there's enough kind of interactions and opportunities for students to learn, right? How do we find those balances? And I think there's a lot of concern by schools, I hear it still, about, well, what's that mean for instructional time, right? And how do we continue to do that? So I could almost imagine and by the way, at every grade level, I think this is an issue. So I mentioned kindergarten, but I think at every grade level, there's these types of concerns. Well, we want to make sure that we allow teachers and schools time to actually visit their practices, rethink, do that continuous improvement model, and reset their plans, and not be as focused on, hey, look, we might lose half a day, so we could do some professional development that's going to help us get better, right? I think it's important that we think about the quality of instruction that's taking place as much as we think about the quantity of instruction that's taking place. And I think finding that balance is part of what I hope to be able to do as we issue this particular guidance. I anticipate that we're going to continue to have disruptions, right? So as you look across the state, and I wish I could sit here and tell you that, gee, the spring looks just wonderful and great. I don't know, right? And I'm worried about what the winter months may bring us. And I've jokingly told people, if you have enjoyed the pandemic in the spring and the summer, imagine what we have to anticipate in the winter. I mean, I think we've got challenges ahead that we're going to have to do that. But again, it's kind of coming together ultimately to move that as a whole group and to have these expectations as we move forward. And then I'm going to use as an example remote learning as an area in which we can provide some additional guidance in my view. I am as worried, and I hope this will transition, and hopefully Elaine's able to help me transition when he comes on, but we want to make sure that our students are being engaged regardless of the environment that they're in. So teachers also have mentioned to me that they're teaching both in class and having to address the remote learners. And I was asked certain questions of, isn't there some other way we can start to think about supports and find some ways to address that? Our key, I think, is not that we're just having students sit in front of a screen, but that it's a quality amount of time in front of the screen, appropriate amount of time, that we're balancing the needs of students that are in person as well as the students that are remote, that our interactions with parents could be improved in different ways. And again, this is not meant as a criticism of any one practice, but the reality of how do we make sure that we're allowing room for improvement and allowing people to rethink their plans if they think, hey, look, this isn't working as well as we want. How do we keep doing that? So that's what I intend, and I think the education field will appreciate that type of conversation. I think it's a challenge because everyone is balancing a lot of different things, but I think collectively we're learning how to manage in this time and learning how to improve. And I think we can provide even more specific and additional guidance that's going to help our schools through this moment in time. So I leave you pretty much with that. I know that I've got one more angle on this, and before Lane comes, and this is I want to shift your thinking. I know I'm talking about the short term, and I might actually want to talk about this Nebraska Ready a little bit more in the strategic plan time if I could. You know, what I want to just highlight, I had outlined Nebraska Ready in my speech at the NDE Day and one time frame, I forget, I guess that was July, you know, time runs together, but at the end of July, I started to announce this notion that we could push forward and think a little bit differently about what our promises are to our students. And so I'll highlight this. I think AQuESTT is a really strong, you know, systemic vision for the types of things that we want to do in education. And then our equity efforts have been really strong from a values perspective and our expectations of what the system looks like from an equity perspective, but also what our outcomes are. But I think we're going to have to get specific about what we expect out of the student experience and where they're able to ensure that they are ready for their futures. I've always said the best accountability system would be a system where our students down the line say, I got what I needed to be successful. And so that's what I envision in a conversation around Nebraska Ready. And I'll try to engage the strategic planning committee a little bit in that dialogue a little bit later. But it really gives us a chance to lay out that path and kind of put a marker down as a state board on kind of our next steps in our strategic plan, our next steps in the direction that I think the department can help lead in. It ties together the things that we've done from standards and expectations in schools to really making that promise to the student level. And I think that's our key work. So I soapboxed a little bit, but you know, I appreciate just being able to share some of that with you, use this public setting to be able to share that with you, and hopefully move forward. I know Lane's going to come on. I would take questions as Lane comes on. If there's anything so far I've talked about, Lane's going to come on and talk about attendance and actually a bit of a follow-up to the work that was done with Hetty Chain and the presentations that she made. But I'll certainly take questions from you and bring Lane on as well. So. And I don't see questions, so I hope Lane's on, because otherwise I'm done.
Good morning, board. Good morning, commissioner. Glad to be able to join you today virtually. And yeah, the commissioner really teed up the conversation that I wanted to share with you quite well. So thanks for that, commissioner. So, you know, as school has begun for many of our districts, all of our districts probably at this point, we have been learning a lot about the ways that we need to be providing even more supports. And as the commissioner mentioned, more specific guidance, more specific examples and scenarios, answering some of those scenarios. And one of the biggest places that we've been asked for some clarification is around student attendance and what attendance really looks like. So if you recall last year during September, you all declared September as Attendance Awareness Month. And each September, it's kind of a national movement, national organization around Attendance Month. And so we're trying to think about that again this year and the ways that we can put out some support. We're also simultaneously in a space where we know that technology is absolutely key. So what I wanted to share with you is kind of our early thinking around this topic. So we are in the process of developing a campaign that we are calling Connected, Present, Engaged, and Supported. connected, present, engaged, and supported. And what we're doing is at NDE and with our partners creating a slew of resources for our educators. And then really importantly, our parents, communities, and care providers that are oftentimes hosting school in their facilities while their students or while those that are in their care are receiving virtual education. So what are ways that we can support all of those entities to be connected, present, engaged, and supported? And I want to share just a little bit about each of those. So September also happens to be Digital Equity Month. And again, we've been learning a lot about the gaps in technology, the gaps in broadband, the gaps in access to devices and the infrastructure to make that all work for our students. And so we're really raising some awareness. We'll be sharing out some surveys and trying to understand better where those gaps remain. We know our schools really busted it over this weekend, over this summer to fill some of those gaps, using those CARES dollars to make some big investments. But we still want to know how we can continue to support and ensure that all students are connected, and all of our staff that are teaching virtually are connected as well. So that's the connected piece. We're also thinking about at home, the parents, community members, and providers, what connection looks like for them as well. As far as present, that second piece of our campaign, we're really thinking about the need to reframe the idea of attendance. For so long, it's been thought of as just a student in a seat, right? And we know that it's about way more than that. It's about participation. It's about that connection and that contact, as well as, really importantly, that engagement. So as the commissioner spoke about the commissioner's guidance, we're thinking about some of those scenarios. So a student logs on to their web portal so that they can learn virtually, but they don't engage. How do we balance those two pieces? They're connected, but they're not engaged. So what does that mean for attendance? Those kinds of questions are the things that we hope to be able to provide some more clarity for our schools. And then what does it mean to be present for parents, communities, and our providers? How can we ensure that our students have what they need? And what does that physical space at home or in their care center look like? So those are the pieces around present. The commissioner mentioned this as well, but engagement is absolutely key. It was key pre-COVID, right? But across the modalities, across whether that is a student is sitting in session or in person or is learning virtually or remotely, what does engagement look like? And how are we ensuring that they are engaged in the learning that will continue to further them, right? So engagement, what are those engagement strategies for our educators? What are ways that we can incorporate engagement strategies for parents? So that they know when to let their student take a break from a screen? What are some resources that they may have for engaging in things like the arts and PE and music at home and without a screen, perhaps, to get that screen break? The final piece here is supported. And as the commissioner mentioned, with Launch Nebraska, we've put out a lot of professional learning. And we know that that professional learning must evolve and that we have to meet the needs and develop the developing needs of our educators, specifically with that professional learning, but then also ensuring that our schools have what they need for the social emotional well-being of their staff, as well as their students, again, across those modalities. So tons more to be developed and to come out around our campaign, but really trying to up the ante here a little bit with this idea of connected, present, engaged, and supported. And we're excited to think of ways that we can really share those resources to support our educators and, really importantly, our students and families.
Thanks, Lane. It looks like there's some
Deborah?
questions.
Yeah, thanks, Lane. I love that. Connected, present, engaged, and supported. That's amazing. And I love that you're really focusing on the social emotional learning of the students too. I have a question around the attendance. I saw one of the school districts in my region put out some information that they had so much participation or attendance. I forget what the number was. And so I now understand that just from what you've said that, you know, I don't know if they're counting whether they've just logged in or on or if there is participation, you know, and so am I correct in understanding that you are going to be giving guidance and looking at that piece and how to measure that so there is some consistency? Will you just explain that a little further for me?
You bet. And one of our, so yes, is the short answer. We're going to be providing even more clarity than we already have, Deb. On Launch Nebraska, we have a document that is called Considerations for Student Attendance, and it outlines the flexibilities that schools have, right? So schools within Rule 2 have a lot of flexibility to identify their policies for attendance. And we've been really encouraging folks to look at those attendance policies, especially in these times, right? But to the commissioner's point, we can provide clarity around those specific scenarios like the one that you just mentioned. And that's where our kind of next step is. So we've told districts they have flexibility to kind of, you know, tweak their policies a little bit around attendance. And now we can provide them even further guidance on some of those scenarios.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing the vision and direction. I think the work that Hetty Chang has done in attendance and your presentation this summer was great in this area. I guess my question is, linking a little bit to the work we're doing around Rule 10 also, how do we make that next step that's really about competency-based education, moving away from this concept of seat time? Because much of our attendance thinking is also associated with seat time thinking as opposed to competency-based. So, you know, engagement and outcomes also go hand in hand. Have you given thought in this direction to how do we message the importance of transitioning into competency-based learning, which I know is happening around the country and is really shortening seat time in front of a screen sometimes because it's really focusing on what do we want our students not just be able to know, but also be able to do. Have you had some discussion in that arena with your planning?
It's definitely come up quite a bit. And I think as our Rule 10 discussions move forward, that's something that is top of mind as well. Commissioner, I don't know if you have anything additionally to add to that and from your perspective.
Our students, and kind of back to this notion of where we go with outcomes for students. It's about learning. It's not about time, right? And I think we've got to figure out how we kind of manage both of those. As our theme was with Administrator Days or with NDE Day around, you know, disruption and innovation. And so I think that's one of the areas from a policy standpoint, I think we're going to have to push and use this opportunity to do that. And so completely agree, figuring out a way that we can get that embedded in the Rule 10 or other rules that we have. And I think to Lane's point around just attendance, guess what? We had students that attended that were not engaged before, right? So that's not a new issue. However, in this moment in time, how do we take the technologies and the innovation that we have to demonstrate different ways to engage students that's not about just simply the amount of time that they're sitting in a classroom or sitting in front of a computer screen? And so finding that in these moments and removing barriers from that, from exploring those things will be important.
Well, first of all, Lane, I always enjoy what you bring to us. And today I particularly enjoyed your mention of the arts. And the reason why is because the data says that if you'd like to keep kids coming to school and you'd like to keep them engaged, then that should be one of the last things that you cut. And if you noticed in the Lincoln Journal-Star this morning, at the university, one of the things that's on the chopping block with budgets is the dance program. So I listen to the tapes. I sometimes can't go to all the NASB meetings that they have once a week, where they provide information for state board members. They come together in discussion, almost like a coffee group. But one of the ones that was most fascinating to me was the superintendent from El Paso, Texas, who said that he thought including the arts in his curriculum during COVID was going to be impossible, because how do you do chorus concerts with all of the information about COVID and that sort of thing? And what he discovered is that with a little bit of creativity, imagine, okay, a little bit of creativity, that so many things in the arts were accessible in the curriculum and so important for students to still have. And so I thought that was fascinating that this superintendent, who had been so successful in El Paso about getting all kids to school, and I mean, he was fervent about it. And so he mentioned that part of it and how important it was. So I remember one time at the beginning of this, when you had chosen attendance as one of your goals, and I thought, oh, there's so many more important things than that. But as I study it, I see that that attendance issue is probably one of the most important, and I'm very proud that that's one that you have chosen. And I'm also excited that you mentioned the arts and their importance in your report today.
Any other board members? Lane? Okay.
Thanks, Lane, for
Thank you, Lane. Take care. So Commissioner, do you have anything further you'd like to add?
You know, I had such a long list, and I think I'm at the end of it, so I think we're good, so.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the president's report, and that would be me. I just want to give, some shout outs to some folks. First off, during COVID, up until last month, we were meeting our committee meetings and our board meetings by Zoom. And last month, we had the opportunity to be here for our regular board meeting. We had our committee meetings by Zoom. And then yesterday, we had a bit of normalcy, which for me, it felt really good. Was I worried about my safety, my wellness? Yes, I was. But the staff at NDE, under the leadership of Ryan, with Andrea, and all of the staff in this room, they just went out of their way to make sure that we were in a safe environment yesterday. And I just cannot thank them enough for their going the extra mile. And just to be here today, again, is going the extra mile for Drew to be working the cameras. And I'm so impressed with this little thing that's wheeling around in front of us. I haven't quite figured out that little robot yet, but I just can't emphasize enough how much the staff is dedicated, not just to us, but to all of the students across the state and the educators across the state. So I just wanted to make sure I shared that. I want to let all of my board members know that I couldn't do this job without Vice President Kojans. She and I, we collaborate all the time. We hope that when you bring a voice to us with a concern or an issue, we talk about it. And we try to come up with, if we have to do some compromising, we'll work it out. But please know that we talk often. In fact, I talk more to Patsy than I do anybody else these days. But it's just fun, and sometimes it's just fun conversation to just check on each other. So thank you, Patsy, for being there for me. And I also want to put out there that I am very proud of our commissioner and what he has done since COVID started with his weekly, bi-monthly meetings with administrators across the state. I tried to get in on all of them. I missed a couple of them. But Commissioner, you just did an outstanding job. You had your agenda together. You had such a, you continue to have such a variety of panelists for the administrators to learn from or to listen to ask questions of, and the governor's on there regularly. I can't thank you enough for that. I've learned a lot. I think our administrators had a better feel for getting school started than they did when school ended in the spring, although they still have lots of questions. And I was most proud the other day when I read about the commissioner having a teacher advisory board. I am most impressed with that. I think all of us who have taught or who have been in education know that the teachers, the classroom folks, are typically the last voice to be heard at the table. And yet they are probably the most important voice that should be at every table where education is being discussed. So Commissioner, thank you. I think that was a collaborative effort with NSCA on that part to get teachers. And one thing I didn't quite get was, are there like para-educators on there, or are they just all classroom teachers?
Right now, it's classroom teachers, and we kind of started down this path of going, hey, look, there's a real need around COVID and the environment that we're facing. I think the other exciting part is we're going to learn from this and actually do something on an ongoing basis, even beyond on COVID. And so, and truly, thanks to those folks, and I'm just going to tell you the passion of teachers. And what that kind of representative group even gives us, it was great insights and continue to be, and some of the things that even I'm thinking about that we need to be doing and providing flexibilities is being able to hear those voices, and also our interactions with school leaders and superintendents, and kind of mesh those things together, because not everyone hears those, even from a school leader perspective, I suspect, don't have that type of dialogue on a regular basis. So we're trying to model some of those behaviors and find out what else we can do to improve that communication. And it truly is going to take, those supports for teachers to make improvements that are necessary and to get us through this moment in time. But as we've always known, education taking place in that classroom. Research evidence shows that it's about that connection between teachers and students, even when we're talking engagement, right? So it's meaningful and important work, and so we can expand that as we keep going, because I think your point about others are important too.
And I think too, when I think back to when I was teaching in the classroom, and certainly when I was doing mentoring work, when I was working full-time, I'd have questions that I would ask in a panel presentation at one of our meetings. And I'd say, who is the Commissioner of Education? Nobody knew. They didn't even know what the Commissioner of Education did. Well, I'm pretty certain that a good percentage of our teachers across the state know who the Commissioner of Education is. Matt has done an outstanding job of networking, so. But moving on, but thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
If you are unsure if you have already put in a travel request for something, Patsy? Oh, Rachel, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I just want to take this moment in your president's report to thank you and Patsy and Commissioner Ryan Scott. With my tenure on the board, one of the changes for our meeting this past, we all need to change. Lots of things are happening. Routines change. as schools have been facing it. Well, I appreciate the changes that we made. You made a change in our structure so that we no longer are doing the quasi-judicial role that we have within our regular business meeting. And that change was probably the best change I have seen while I've been on this board. It was a great example of you, Patsy, and whomever providing leadership for change for this board in how we do our business. So I just want to thank you. That was a great change that a lot of people may not be aware of the time that it takes to fill that role that we have. But by approaching it in a different way this meeting, I think it really became a more meaningful process in what we have to do, and it gave it the time that it deserves in that role that we have to do. So I just want to thank you for that change yesterday. It was fabulous.
Thank you. If you are unsure if you have submitted a travel request for something such as the NASB conference coming up, please check with your travel coordinator, which would be Andrea or Laura, because when you look into Spark, you're only going to see the current request for travel that we will be taking action on at our board meeting. Does everybody understand that? So if you're not sure if you signed up for something, please check with your travel coordinator. And I will try to do a better job in my newsletter of letting you know of any upcoming conferences that you can probably zoom in on or special meetings. I'll try to do a better job on that for you. And speaking of the NASB conference coming up, if you haven't already done so, I really encourage you to sign up for that and let Laura or Andrea know. There's just so much information provided, and Rachel has been part of all of that planning, I believe. Registration, I don't believe, is online yet, but Laura and Andrea will get those that are going to participate signed up.
I just want to shout out, I think Deborah Neary and Ryan have been actually on the NASB conference planning committee, and they've really done a great job for this virtual.
I was unaware of that.
I think, haven't you and Ryan been serving on that?
I'd love to take credit for it, but I'm not. I'm on the sustainability committee. I've been working
Then
on
Ryan
that.
has been. I knew,
Okay.
yeah, they've really done a great job.
All right. And as I mentioned last month, Patsy, Vice President Co-Johns, is going to be our delegate to the NASB annual meeting. And I've asked Robin Stevens, gender balance here, to be the alternate in case Patsy, by chance, cannot do it. And Robin's already let me know that Patsy better be doing it. Oh. So thank you both for accepting those roles. The Legislative Committee is going to be giving a report later today. I'm anxious to hear what it's about. But I want to remind each of you that over the years, and with I know Rachel started, we've built a great process of how we do our legislative priorities. In working with the legislature for the next session or the next biennium. And I look forward to seeing how we can work towards those priorities that the committee's going to come with the recommendation on later next month or whenever it will be, because it's a valuable document. I've got it here somewhere, but it is a valuable document for everyone. For the commissioner, for legal counsel, for each one of us. But I stress that also because it's valuable for me, because when I asked for things that you as board members wanted as priorities for this year, Vice President Co-Johns and I, we put together what would be my president's policy priorities. And I pulled this out last night to review it. And because I was feeling like, well, we're not getting much accomplished here. But just with the committees that I sat in on yesterday, having 2 hours for each committee, I was able to go down my list and circle things that we are now on board with. COVID put us back a bit, but I'm really pleased to see that we're moving forward with many of these things that we put down as priorities and that you folks wanted as well. Finally, I have some exciting news. I'm a graduate of the University of Nebraska at Kearney, as is Vice President Co-Johns. I think those are the only two in the room here. Who is? I thought you went to Wayne.
Undergrad, Westmore, let's get it right. But all of my post-grad came from UNK, so I get,
All right, you are a loper.
well, I get all the requests to donate, so I don't know if that means I'm alumnus
Okay.
or not.
Well, speaking of donating, he's referring to the Alumni Foundation. And during homecoming every year, the Alumni Association gives out awards, gives out several awards. And those awards are for outstanding professionalism, civic work, cultural work, and charitable contributions. And the recognition of those individuals will be taking place during homecoming week. But because of COVID, they will be virtual. But we have a board member who has been given the College of Education's Distinguished Educator Award, and that would be Pat Tim. So if we could all give Pat, I wish you were here. I hope you're watching, Pat. But I'll keep you posted. I believe the commissioner is going to do the introductory remarks of her before she is introduced all virtually. So I'll let you know when those dates are so that you can participate. Yeah. And with that, that concludes my report. Moving on. Agenda item 5. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I second that motion.
Okay. The motion was made by Rachel and seconded by Patsy. Per board policy, there is no discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda. Andrea, please call the roll.
Neary,
Yes.
Co-Johns,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Wise,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Tim, Witzel, 6 yes, 2 absent.
Thank you. Motion passes. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, standing committee reports. We'll start with the policy committee. Lisa, could you please provide a report from the policy committee meeting?
I'd be happy to. I'm going to try and get this thing out of my way. The Committee on Policy met on September 3rd, 2020, and reports that it had an update item regarding the State Board Bylaw B2. After much discussion, it was recommended by the committee that this should appear as a full board discussion at the next session in October. The committee also discussed update items on policy P10, audits of the Nebraska Department of Education, and the State Board internal policy P8, which is the trust funds. It is a recommendation of the committee to refer these two policies to the Budget and Finance Committee for review and recommendations to the Policy Committee coming back in October. The committee discussed proposed revisions to update State Board Bylaw B9, public participation at board meetings. After much discussion, it was recommended by the committee that this should appear as another full board discussion item at the board's next session, which is in October. The committee reviewed and discussed the proposed revisions to Board Bylaw B5, board meeting notification for regular meetings. After discussion, the committee will propose revisions to be adopted at the next business meeting in October. The committee heard from Dr. Zainab Rita, NDE Equity Officer, regarding the implementation of position statement regarding human dignity, the revision to the State Board position S10, Coordinated School Health. It was recommended by Dr. Rita that these two position statements be referred to AQuESTT Student Success Access Support Committee for commencing the writing of the new human dignity statement and revising the current Coordinated School Health position. Boy, that was a mouthful. And bringing them back to the policy committee at a later date. The committee concurs with that recommendation. The committee heard from Dr. Corey Epler regarding the state board's position on S12, assessment of student learning. Dr. Epler and the committee members discussed the importance of revisions to this position statement, and it should be looked at in tandem with Rule 10 revisions. Committee members agree that this position statement should be referred to the Strategic Planning and Performance and Improvement Committee to have the opportunity to ensure alignment of the two with Rule 10 and that one at a later date. The committee also recommends that revisions to the state board policy P4, personal policies, state school policies, and administrative memo be approved at the business meeting. This concludes the policy committee report on behalf of PAD.
Okay. Lisa, is there further discussion on item 6.1A, bylaw 5, board meeting notification for regular meetings?
Let me get back to my agenda. Regular board meetings, it was this in reference to the committee meeting?
Pardon me?
Was this out of policy committee, what we discussed?
Yeah, this was the policy.
Okay, I'm going to refer to the commissioner, if you don't mind sharing a few words.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would just draw to your attention as we continue to make any types of changes in the policies, just reviewing this, part of the long term, I think, for us, just like we did yesterday with a little bit of a change, we want to make sure those policies start to make sure that they capture the direction that you want to go. So whether it's this one, I might just highlight too that, yeah, I think you heard Lisa mention a few times referring it to other committees for work. And what I guess what I would highlight with a lot of these is the intention of being able to use those policies in other committee conversations to ensure that takes place. This is probably one that only historically has existed between probably the president and vice president and the policy committee for dialogue about what the meeting schedule is, and then of course it comes from the full board. So
thank you for that. And I'd also say that I think this helps us be a stronger team as board members when we collaborate and pass things on that better fit, or maintain part of that discussion but share it to get input from other committees that are related to it. I think it's long overdue that we do that. It makes us stronger, more informed, and I love that what we did, especially in policy, is bring discussion back to the full board that they're going to have that information to make further informed decisions down the road. I think that's vital, and we need to keep that communication open. We need to keep disseminating that information to make us a better team. So, does that answer your question?
Anyone
Madam
have any
Chair?
questions for Lisa? Okay.
Oh, Patsy.
Patsy.
I don't have a question, but I think that it's so important for the policy committee to do that, and I'd like to thank you because when Chairperson Tim passed the equity policy to us on the AQuESTT committee, and we were part of taking a look at that and making choices about language, that sort of thing. Not only was it an honor, but we felt like it was very much needed that we were able to make sure that things that we were talking about, verbiage that we were using, was crossing over. And that's the same way with the human dignity. So very, very responsible thing for the policy committee to do. And it makes more work for us, which is great.
Well, I appreciate that comment because you guys guys, I sound like a student. The committee members did an outstanding job with the equity statement, and look what it's evolving into, you know, in that pyramid down to a scorecard. And so I was very impressed when Dr. Rita shared that yesterday. So it's just working together. I mean, we can work together here, but in committee, recognizing that it's better, you know, to have it in different committees, not just one. So I'm finished, Madam Chair.
Okay. Lisa, is there any further discussion on item 6.1B, position statement on human dignity?
Dr. Rita talked about that, and when I think of equity, the team that worked on that did an outstanding job. But beyond equity is dignity, the respect, and I think that's a perfect direction to go, because there's a lot of disrespect going on in the nation and the state, and we need to delve into that. And Dr. Rita, what she showed us as a PowerPoint was powerful.
Okay. And
I don't know if the commissioner wanted
Patsy,
to add it.
aren't you working with Dr. Rita on that?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Thank you for all your work on that. I know you put a lot of time into that.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions on the human dignity piece?
Can I just
Yes.
clarify? Because I think that one was handed off to another committee, but I forget, yeah, it was, okay. Very
Thank
good.
you for that.
Yep.
Okay. 6.1C. Lisa, is there any further discussion on item 6.1C, the position statement S10, coordinated school health?
I have lost my place. Could you say that number again?
S10, coordinated school health.
I don't have anything to add to that at this time. Yes.
I'll just add to that quickly. That particular policy is one that, in fact, we're a little behind in getting moving forward. There's been some great work within the department around the whole child, whole school, whole community initiative. And so that policy contains elements of that, but it is a policy that was designed around language used by the CDC 10 years ago. And so the main emphasis on that particular change will be to move the language more in alignment with a lot of the work that is being done by the Department of Education. And that one also is being handed off to the Student Access Committee. And Patsy, just to kind of get that committee get a little bit of a view on some language to update that. But conceptually, there are elements already in it that reflect the work that's being done by the department under the whole child, whole school, whole community initiative.
And I think that's going to be very important moving forward, that whole child. And I think it's probably going to, what we have as policy, going to be improved over time as we get more information, like from NASB's study and different entities like that. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Anyone have any questions for Lisa or Rachel? Deb?
Just a thought, and I just crosses committees, but that whole body health piece, I'm not sure we really addressed that in our legislative committee and the goals that we set. And so anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
And I think that's an example where this is a good example that once in a while we maybe get behind in the policy direction of what other work is being done. And so I think this is an example of a policy that is, the language is maybe a little more representative of good work that was done 5, 7, 10 years ago. And there are elements of the language that still reflect. So I think the more we can move policy language into where we need to be today, it helps all of our committees in moving forward. And so I think that's where this policy change, moving it forward relatively quickly, will help us align our committee work around whole child initiatives.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I would also just add that so Dr. Rita's work on this topic and on other things. And we've actually, knowing that bringing these elements together on coordinated school health, we've really looked at the department and realized a lot of different elements have to come together. And so in addition to a lot of other things that Zainab is working on right now, including helping a lot on the front with all the COVID response, is rethinking how that looks across the department. And I suspect she shared some of that with this committee and others that she's worked with, but that's going to be a really critical part of our ongoing work. As Rachel said, we used the board policy to help kind of drive some other agendas within the agency and rethink it. And so I want you to understand that's a really important part of that dialogue, not just for the board's purpose, but also how I structure and organize resources at the agency. So.
And she mentioned using that as a model.
Yeah.
So
thanks for that work.
Any further discussion on that? Okay, Lisa, is there any further discussion on item 6.1D on position statement 12, assessment of student learning?
Jeremy Henninger, and I can't remember who helped him out, did an outstanding job sharing information with us. I believe in the teaching and learning today, we're going to hear more from Jeremy, and so I will just wait for that, because he shares it a whole lot better than I would ever. I'm not
He does a great job, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does, and he answers questions so well that I'm not a psychometrician, but I think I am by the time I've listened to him, and then he goes away, and then I'm back to where I was. What? So, anyway, he does a great job.
I'll show you. I'm actually presenting on behalf of Jeremy, I think, on that assessment stuff, so it's not near as good as what you just described. So I'll do my fill-in
Well,
portion.
you'll be better than I would be, sir, so we're good.
Okay. All right, moving on. Lisa, is there a motion on item 6.1E, policy 4, personnel policies, state school policies, administrative memos?
Yes, Madam Chair, I move to adopt revisions to State Board Policy P4.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Lisa, seconded by Rachel. Is there any discussion on this motion?
I would like you to maybe go over some of the discussion that happened in your committee about this.
Oh, that's a great idea. Commissioner, can you help out with that?
I wasn't at the committee, but I know Scott is behind me, so I don't know.
that's-
So he could probably give a better overview than I can. It is.
Because it was pretty
Yeah.
detailed, and I have notes on it, but if you don't mind, Scott, that would be great.
Sure, if people can hear me. The broadcast can.
Come to the microphone, Scott.
Yeah.
I appreciate your willingness to share.
My recollection of this was we largely readopt what existed. We made a couple of fairly minor changes. There's a paragraph that I think through the years was aimed at providing the commissioner explicit authority to adopt what we've traditionally referred to as administrative memos for employees internally in the department on how you do some kind of routine matters and internal matters like that were kind of outside the bargaining agreement, personnel rules that were operational. What it didn't capture was that in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a state Supreme Court decision that said personnel rules that affect the terms and conditions of employment need to be in regulation. So the existing policy said the commissioner can do these administrative memos without coming back to the board, but it used very broad language, so we wanted to clarify that except for those things in the personnel rules that require. So that was basically a change to catch up with a decade plus of developments. And then we added one reference at the end when it talks about our equal opportunity and employment outlook, you know, as to employment at the department. There was the much talked about U.S. Supreme Court case that more expansively interpreted the clause because of sex, involving, I think it was, the funeral home, if you followed that story. And so we added a line that just says that we, as a department, our policy is to follow all federal laws regarding equal opportunity employment without getting into a litany of discussion on that case and what that got into, so that we're basically following along with not only the federal law, but what the Supreme Court says that law means. And that's essentially it.
Board members, do any of you have questions for Scott?
And I like that we have that gentleman, because just what he said about we're gonna follow the federal whatever eliminates a lot. As things change, we'd have to go back and rework things in writing. This takes care of that rigmarole for future. So, thank you, Scott.
Any other discussion or questions, concerns?
Thanks for the question, Patsy.
All right, seeing nothing further, Andrea, please call the roll.
Neary. Hojons.
Yes.
Fricky.
Yes.
Nichols.
Yes.
Wise.
Yes.
Stevens.
Yes.
Tim. Witzel. 6 yes, 2 absent.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. 6.2, Robin, please provide a report from the Legislative Committee meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get into that, I would like for all of our board members, if possible, to go to 6.2. And the one that we're going to be spending most of our time with is actually the one that says 2120-2023 Legislative and Regulatory Priorities. And it is a draft. 2023 Legislative and Regulatory Priorities. So if you have an ability to get to that, that's where we're going to be spending a lot of our time. While you're looking for that, I really appreciated your remarks, President Maureen, whatever I call you. And if I may, just to give a brief story to emphasize your willingness to say thank you to our support staff, if that's okay. About 4:30 or so last night, we quit our work, if you'll remember, and I really was emotionally tired. And we'd had the support staff there getting us connected and all of that sort of thing. So when I get back here, I find a way to relax. And then about 6:30, we decide that we're going to go out for some dinner. And so I come in here and hear all of those people that you've already mentioned, but if you don't mind, I'm going to mention them again and to embarrass them maybe a little bit. But here's Ryan, here's Andrea, here's Laura up on the screen, here's Travis. I hesitate to mention names because I always forget someone. Did I say Andrea? Did I say Ryan? Drew, on and on. Even the commissioner was in here. Yeah, well, whatever. But, and then we go to lunch, and I don't know how late they worked here. And they had already put in a full day as well. And so I just wanted to share that story because it just so much relates to the thank you that you gave to each of those people. So anyway, if you are there, or even if you're not, please try to follow along as best you can. And just so you know, the members of this committee, Patsy and Deborah, and of course without our fearless leader, Brian Halstead, not very much would get done. So I really appreciate those folks and all the work that they do as well. And I encourage them, as I go through my little remarks, that you feel free to jump in. I don't know if Brian is able to zoom in, but if he is there, obviously, Brian, feel free to jump in as well. The reason that I want to just go to the legislative and regulatory priorities and not spend much time on the bills that have been enacted is I would just find myself, I think, repeating what you already have the ability to read. So I'm not going to spend much time there other than to say, much like Maureen made mention, are we really getting anything accomplished here? And you went through and, hey, you circled all these things that we had gotten accomplished. We did realize that, I don't know if it was through the commissioner's efforts, through Brian's efforts, or a combination of many people's efforts, but many of the things that we are supporting were accomplished. Legislation was passed. And so, yeah, I felt better about going back through that and finding out, yes, indeed, a lot of the things that we talk about were accomplished, and we should probably thank our legislators as well. So I'm going to go through 2023 legislative and regulatory priorities. And I always think it's important that we give just a little bit of background. And in October of 2018, this document was created, and it has been tweaked ever since. So those people who were heavily involved in the creation of that document deserve a tremendous amount of credit. Maureen, again, in her comments, emphasized how this document is used. We use it, we take it to our legislators, and we say, hey, here's what we believe that we feel strongly about, and you need to know that we would appreciate your support, your sponsorship, and that sort of thing. So this is a really valuable document. And that being said, we are really asking each of you, not just our committee members, but each of you to spend some time in looking at this document and getting back to us. I think my plan is to send it out to all of you again, seek your input so that we can have then a really good discussion next month in creating and tweaking or refurbishing this document. So keep your eye on this document. It is a tremendously important one that we share with a lot of people, not the least of which is our legislators. I always ask, okay, why do we have legislative priorities and regulatory priorities? And Brian always comes to my rescue and says, okay, legislative priorities are things that we absolutely want the legislature to work on, okay? The regulatory priorities are things that we say, legislature, we as a board are dealing with these issues. So they don't feel like they have to go through the legislative process. This is part of our process, the regulatory process. So as we go through this, we'll be talking both about legislative and then about regulatory priorities. And I think it's important that we understand the difference between the two. And I ask Brian every time that we open this document up, okay, tell me again. So he probably gets tired of that, and you may get tired of me saying that to you, but I need to hear things a lot of times before I really get it. All right. Enough of that discussion. And again, I encourage the other members of the board to chime in at the committee, and really the entire board to chime in at any time. But I'm going to just touch on the high points of our discussion. I'm not going to go through the entire discussion, if you will. Just to summarize, if you have that open, the area behavioral and mental health, we continue to keep that as a high priority and really have nothing from the committee standpoint to add, subtract, or whatever. But again, this document will be sent out to each of you. We expect and would want your input if there are things that need to be added or taken out. Early childhood. I know that this particular, I think it's bullet number 1 that talks about 5-year-olds being allowed to go to preschool. And that is near and dear to numerous people on this board. And if you don't mind, President Maureen contacted me and says, I really like to know where we're headed with this. We have a long discussion about this, and it looks so simple to me. Well, you know, why can't we just do this? But unfortunately, there are a lot of things that muck up the discussion. And that sounds really negative. It's really just a way of me trying to explain to you that it's much messier than just going in and saying, hey, why don't we just let 5-year-olds, if we think it's right, that they should be allowed to go to preschool and that sort of thing. Well, there's federal money tied in with that. There are just numerous things that mess up the water. To get sponsorship for a legislative bill, because right now the legislature is saying no, it's 4-year-olds that has to go there, and so we're keeping it in this legislative priority. We just want you to know that it's not as simple as just saying let's do it and let's get a sponsor and let's move forward. And so I look forward to a lot of feedback from you folks as we move into that particular one. I'm going to go then to equitability and value added, line services and support. I always have troubles with that word or that phrase value added, and Brian emphasizes to me 2 great examples of what we have done as a department is NWEA MAPS testing and ACT testing. Now, you know that, and I'm not going to go into the testing issue because I can get really crazy about that sort of stuff, but that is truly of value added to the district. And I think is really important that we understand that, yes, indeed, we are doing a lot of this stuff. And when we say value added, and Commissioner, I look at him a little bit, but as I understand it, that is totally funded by the department using one of the multiple funds that we have. And that is for every school district within the state. So that is definitely of value added. And I hope that helps each of you understand a little bit more about that particular area. School finance and school organization, it's very brief, it's very to the point, but we see no reason in changing it. That doesn't mean that you can't. We're just saying the committee feels, at least at this particular time, that there's no need to change that. Workforce development, bullet number 3, that in my notes, that's all I wrote down. Can anybody tell me what bullet number 3 talks about? If you have it. Say it one more time. The ACT.
Expanded use and assessment products that would better inform and prepare students about career opportunities.
Okay, and we spent a lot of time discussing that particular area as well. And so that was an area. Patsy, do you have anything that we could add there? I'm drawing a little bit of a blank, but I know that we spent quite a bit of time. Of course, I got into ACT and that sort of thing, and that kind of muddied the waters. But the main point is the area of workforce development remains a very high priority for the department, and especially the board. Yes, thank you.
I think historically, Robin, on that particular bullet, that students answer some questions when they take the ACT about their future career goals and career interests. I can't remember exactly what it looks like, but I think that discussion originated from the desire to not just focus on ACT scores, but determining, is there information that's being self-reported by students in that process that would be of value in planning, you know, career directions, programmatic, those kinds of things. I think
Yep.
that was part of the evolution of that bullet, whether or not we can gather that information, have ACT report that information, and then would that information be of use in informing what kinds of career-based, you know, programmatic opportunities we look at.
Thank you.
I believe.
Thank you. Thank you. Patsy, did I see?
I was just going to say that, and then we had a discussion too, a little bit about the ACT and being a college prep test, and the potential of making sure that there is an ACT test that is different than that, that tests people who are going into workforce CTE kind of occupations, and how that would be different. And
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's in progress right now, but we talked about that idea.
All right. Go ahead, Deborah.
There are tools that we could be incorporating if someone is choosing not to go to college. They still could take the ACT, a different, a subset tool of that would help them make better decisions about their career choices. So,
Thank you. Yes.
I might just add that the, you know, somewhat even the conversation I'm having to want to have with you about Nebraska Ready, you know, and what I want you to see in this conversation, which I think is great, to the connection between this and also later when we're hearing about our budget, you'll hear something about getting funds to match the Perkins dollars that come in. So I think what you'll see is a lot of intersection of these things. And as I sit here and review it, it's like, well, we could probably do a little more alignment between that, and these dialogues really help, I think, for my purposes anyway.
Good. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going, okay, good. I'm going to move us then into the regulatory priorities. And remember, this is part of that document where we are saying, we are telling legislators that, hey, here are areas that we believe we can deal with, and that you don't feel like you have to get involved from a legislative standpoint on these particular areas. Okay? Yes?
I just wanted to emphasize how important the regulatory part is, simply not just informing them of our priorities, but letting them know that this has been dedicated to what we do, so that if a legislative member has a constituent who wants something changed and is dealing with education, we have educated that legislator enough that they'll refer that to us rather than developing something that we might already have in the works, or that they're going to screw up and we have to figure out how to fix it. That probably wasn't quite, but it's to make it political.
We understand.
Anyway.
Yes, okay.
That was just my opinion, not
Well,
that of a state board, so.
Thank you, Lisa. I do appreciate those comments. And again, yeah, okay, that's all right. Okay, and so, again, moving into the regulatory priorities, as we look at accountability and accreditation, obvious to us anyway that is an area, and we'll be talking about Rule 10 there, and that's obvious an area that we did not do any changing on. We just had some discussion about it. College, career, and civic ready, I think we've talked about that a lot already, and it remains a very high regulatory priority for this board. If you'll notice, those of you who have the electronic copy, Brian has updated this particular area of early childhood, and if you'll notice it's been struck through. Why? Because we feel as if we have accomplished that particular area. So that doesn't mean that we can't initiate something else, but because we felt like we accomplished this, it would not be part of our regulatory, this particular bullet anyway, would not be part of our regulatory priority. Yeah, again, Lisa.
I'll try and work this out correctly this time. If you're following the Buffett Foundation in early childhood education, there are thousands and thousands of dollars dealing with the COVID backlash, where there are going to be so many programs that are going to be canceled or eliminated, or they don't have enough funding to do what they've done in the past. And so if there is a way to add under the early childhood education something about appropriately funding the early childhood programs throughout the state somehow. I don't know if there's federal money that we can guide that way, some of the CARES money we can guide that way, but early childhood is so, so important. And I hate to think of the numbers of early childhood facilities that are going to be closing due to COVID. And so I hope you add something along those lines. I don't know, Commissioner, if you could add anything.
Let me just respond real quick, and then Commissioner. Those are the types of things that when I send this document out again, if you would write out what you have just stated to us, that is the type of input that we are seeking, at least at the committee level, and then that will lead us in our discussion, in particular next month. I'm sorry, Rachel?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I just was going to say, Lisa, I think you bring up a really good point. I would see that being captured maybe in more the legislative rather than the regulatory process, moving that up a little bit into that pocket of discussion, because I think that we have limitations in what we can do from a financial perspective. And I think what I'm hearing you say in the report out on the regulatory piece is that we've moved a long way in what we're doing from a regulatory role in early childhood, which is really good. But certainly there's work to be done, but that work to be done might be more in that legislative category of priorities.
And again, I'd really encourage you to share that with us, or at least with me, so that we can discuss that at our next meeting. Commissioner, did you have something?
I think the one other thing I'd add is the opportunity to look, and when we do the budget proposal, you'll see some early childhood investment too. And so, again, just a good connection between this work and also what we do from a budget request perspective.
And I see a lot of these things here aligning not only with budget, but also with policy. And I think those alignments are really what we're trying to do as a board, is to really get our ducks in a row. And so, and the last one I have there, and then I will stop and certainly would seek some thoughts maybe from Patsy or Deb or Brian, and then again the entire board. But education preparation and certification, we maintain that as you see it. Again, if you have things that you would like to add or take out, we are open to that. We want to hear from you. Patsy.
Your previous statement about aligning with policy, I also want to tell you that I believe very strongly that this also, almost every one of these aligns with equity as well. When you're talking about early childhood, our children in different cities, different communities, getting the same type of opportunities to reach their goals, and how are we providing those opportunities? Teacher certification, are students in this state able to look to the front of their classroom and see themselves there in one class or another? Is there a teacher that looks like them? So equity and discovering who is going into the teaching field and what can we do. So I'm saying that all of these align with equitable opportunities as well.
Thank you. Anything to add, Deb?
I wonder, and everything Patsy said, ditto. I wonder if we could ask Brian to match this up with the budget goals and make another draft that we can look at next month. Would that be appropriate? Okay.
Okay. Brian, are you out there? And if you are, is there anything you would like to add?
What Mrs. Neary asked for can be done. They're pretty well aligned, but I don't want to get ahead of the Budget and Finance Committee's recommendation to the board, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that conclude your
Yes.
report?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Robin? Okay. Moving on to 6.3. Patsy, would you provide a report from the Commissioner's Appraisal Committee?
Yes, I will. I will be providing this for Pat Timms, and she's not here today. But we did meet with the commissioner last week and the committee. And we discussed and planned some of the things that the commissioner, sorry about that. We did meet last week, and the commissioner outlined what he was already working on and where he was headed with some of the opportunities that we gave him as a board. And we also celebrated the commissioner a little bit for everything that he had already done and was doing for us in that appraisal meeting. So it was, that was pretty much covers the meeting itself. So I end my report for Pat Timm. I'm sure she'd do a much better job than I did, but.
And I believe we're not going to meet again until, is it October?
Yeah.
Is it October?
Yeah,
Okay.
we meet again in October.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Patsy.
You're welcome.
6.4, Lisa, please provide a report from the AQuESTT Teaching, Learning, and Serving Domain Committee meeting.
Here we go. The Committee on AQuESTT Teaching, Learning, and Serving Domain reports on 2 committee updates, one of which is on statewide summative assessments, for which I will invite the Commissioner to speak a few words, if you would, please.
Yeah, and I'll see if Ryan can share his screen. I think he has the PowerPoint. So I want to share a couple slides. I want to provide just a little bit of context. Obviously, we had to suspend statewide assessment last spring, given all of the impacts of the pandemic, and actually that was permissible both under I don't know what they didn't call it a waiver, I don't think at that time, but a federal I'll call it waiver for the lack of a better word, and as well as we also worked with the governor to put part of that into the executive order. Now, what I want you to know and understand is that part of our plan and what this board had adopted is a plan to move us to a 3-year assessment system. Because of that interruption in our flow also interrupted our plans. And I think, I don't remember the exact time frame, but I think back in June, we actually reflected on where we would go with our 3 through 8 assessment and how we would try to move forward ultimately to make progress on what we hoped for a 3-year assessment plan. And I should say, I'll throw in the word adaptive, it's on the screen, so I just had to look at it. But the 3-year adaptive portion of that, meaning that students are able to, the test goes and meets them where they are, right? And it's a more efficient type of process, and actually something we've spent years in the making of trying to get us to that particular position. But it has that interruption forced us to actually look at that and how do we decide to make some particular process or progress in this point in time. And so working with NWA and our staff, we've been able to move forward with an approach that's with kind of getting us up to speed and being able to move faster on that particular implementation. And there's some trade-offs as a result. And so some of those trade-offs are in what data is available for reporting and how that may work. But it also a trade-off in the sense that we really want this to be student-centered, meaning that we want the benefit of the entire system to be about what's going to be beneficial for our students as they enter the classrooms. As you know, and I guess as Robin had mentioned a little bit previously, that part of the package of assessment includes access to MAP assessment, measures of academic progress. So throughout the year, that part of the assessment that schools really, I think, use for instruction and adjusting instruction and understanding where students are at is seeming to be very important in this moment in time to actually measure where students are at and hopefully adjust and be able to continue that work. But we also want to be able to move to where that through-year assessment, where we're capturing information throughout the year and advantaging the system so it's not just about a singular summative assessment in the end. And so we're going to make progress on that. And we had to change plans, and I guess what we'll be bringing back to you in next month is a little bit more detail about what that plan exactly looks like and how we go there. But I wanted to share with you, and I know we shared with the committee, and we got into a pretty deep dive. That's where Jeremy could get into a deep dive with you all. But in fact, they just, day before yesterday, I believe, had their technical advisory committee meeting with the experts around assessment and having that conversation and guidance on that front. But it puts us in a position where the challenge for us to do the public reporting as we normally had has to change. And so again, we'll share a bit more about what that'll look like as we come back next month. It challenges us a little bit on the assessment front on how it impacts us from an accountability standpoint. And again, that committee had good conversations about how we can, we're not going to not have accountability, but we're going to have accountability with the data that makes the most sense under the current environment, and make sure that we're fair and appropriately moving the direction that we wanted to go along that way. And then we put on here, begin a waiver process from with the U.S. Department of Education. And right before I went into the committee meeting, I got a letter from Secretary DeVos, and I wasn't the only one, but across the country she sent out a letter saying that they weren't going to be granting waivers like they did in the spring. This is not what I'm proposing that we would be doing here. What I'm proposing is that we would be shifting and asking for flexibility around a more innovative assessment approach, which underneath the prior law was actually already allowed, or under the current law is currently allowed. And so we'll just have to spell out that plan. And so it might be, waiver might not be the right word, but we'll be implementing a process in which we lay out a plan for assessment that adjusts to the current circumstances and also moves us forward at the same moment in time. And I think that's going to be really an important part of that. I'll have Ryan go to the next slide. This gives, I know we shared this in the committee yesterday, just gives you kind of a little bit of an overview of the overall assessment. So ACT will continue as we expect, now hopefully not being interrupted going into the spring. Some of you know, or I think we've talked about it before, that we were offering the opportunity for last year's juniors, this year's seniors to be able to participate in ACT, and that's still going forward. But they also our importance of our alternate assessment underneath NSCAS, that we anticipate that'll be largely a standard administration of that, the way that works in the spring. We are working to move forward with our science assessment, and so there's work that's taking place there. We were planning, again, the interruption has slowed some of that down, but it gives us a chance to actually do our field testing. And where this is census, I know we had a bit of that conversation. That means all students that would be in those grade will be actually participating both in the alternate and the general field test. And then where we're still at and coming back with a bit more of that plan is what that NSCAS general assessment looks like. So the more traditional grades 3 through 8, and how we'll make those things come together, and without getting, well, I can't get too technical. Jeremy could get very technical about that approach, but how that will be spelled out. And I just wanted to be able to put this in front of you at this moment in time, knowing that we'll be bringing this back to you in October, and probably for some type of adoption by this board in November of that path and that direction, as we kind of work on the details with all of the from federal and state and through and working with our schools as well to ensure that this is a successful year and we're able to generate the types of data that's going to be helpful. One thing I'm really pleased with, and that Jeremy's put a lot of leadership in and our team's put a lot of leadership and thought in, is how we know that there's things to be learned from this pandemic moment as well. And so even though it might not be able to be used in the same way that we've traditionally used data on school assessment for accountability, we are hoping, I guess, to be able to learn what types of things were working well, what didn't, at least at some scale, instead of maybe always at a school building level or otherwise. We'll be able to do some research and pull out some research and understand the impacts of the pandemic environment in Nebraska. And I think that's extremely important. Secretary DeVos's letter, I think yesterday talked, and I've been in a lot of national conversations about, do you have assessment, not have assessment? What do we do to balance that? The importance of assessment relative to understanding what improvements can be made and how we address equity. All those things are really important. And from our perspective, and I think our history in Nebraska bears this out pretty well, we're interested mostly in that students are being able to be successful and that we're able to provide supports for students in schools. And we don't want to lose that in this mix. But I do think it's a great opportunity for us to become innovative and use that in the most effective way to add that value for the long run. And again, it's going to give us a chance to do some of that work in this time. And I think for those reasons it's good. I know Jeremy and team are working really closely with school districts to understand how that works. And we have some hoops to jump through, as is always the case. But in this case, I'm very pleased with our progress so far and look forward to being able to bring that back to you in some more detail next month.
I wonder, Ryan, could you go back to the previous slide for just a second? Is he done? Yeah. I just wanted to, I had asked a question of, that one. I had asked a question of Jeremy yesterday. I wasn't sure what a census field was. And basically he said that means all students will take that test. Because when I think of a census, data, they're different, reporting 80%, whatever. But that just means that all students will take that. So I wanted to point that out. And then, Commissioner, with assessments, I just wondered with security being utmost for students, we have some schools that are totally virtually now, and depending upon what happens, there might be more. Is there a way to securely allow students to take assessments via, when they're virtually learning? Or how will that work? I mean, once they're, doing virtual learning, it'd be nice if they could be assessed, but I don't know about the security of that.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge, I think, as we go forward, looking at those options. I know we've had conversations with NWA about how to either provide additional flexibilities, or we've even gotten to the conversations around testing and assessment at home and what those things look like. I think this ought to be part of the innovation. As I've talked across the country, I appreciated my colleague from Alaska, Michael Johnson's his name, that said, hey, look, we have not built pandemic-proof assessment systems or accountability systems in the country, and we need to be thoughtful about that. So I anticipate a pretty robust national conversation about how these things intersect, and I want to make sure that we're at the forefront of those conversations as well. And I think the partners that we do have, and certainly NWA and ACT, both are having to explore that, and I feel like we're really right at the table to be able to be engaged in that. But at-home assessment is part of that. Actually, another thing, our efforts around EdReady, and I actually believe that student self-assessment is as meaningful for student engagement as otherwise high scale or scaled assessment as we've seen in the past. And so we have this chance to really take this moment. We still have laws we have to follow, so don't get me wrong. We have to check some boxes as we go, but I think we need to be part of the conversation that improves that, not just for us, but for the nation.
All right, well, thank you. Other questions? I don't know if there's just one. Go ahead.
Yeah, Lisa, I just would like to add, there was one bullet that we talked about also yesterday that has to do more with accountability than the assessment, but it came up in this conversation, and that was the bullet that identified that schools would be, maintaining the same classification. And we had a pretty robust committee discussion about, is there a way that we can give schools an opportunity to bump up? So if schools have been very innovative and if schools have done some things that really they believe they've made some significant improvement, then how might we take a look at that? And so I think that will be a discussion, full board discussion going forward, maybe next month, and in some of our board discussion about how might we do that? Because I do think we need to recognize schools that maybe have made some adjustments that actually have had some significant improvement in instruction. I know we talk a lot about concerns about the unfinished learning or the learning gaps that have occurred, but I think we also have to step back and look at that we may have some districts that have really stumbled on or found or designed some keys that really have improved some student achievement and some outcomes in that perspective. So we had that discussion as well that I think is important to continue forward.
Thank you for mentioning that. That is really important. And because some things are being put on hold, Jeremy also said there are other things that they can do to benefit students moving forward. So there are going to be things that without having the classifications and other things, kind of postponed for a while, that the NDE staff can work on other important things that benefit students. So I just wanted to say that. Any other questions? Okay, I will continue with the report. The second conversation was about praxis, which developed into talking about more than the praxis assessment, showing that a person's ready to become a teacher, like a portfolio, so that's a discussion that possibly after it's further discussed in committee, how to help the teacher prep program and what qualifies a person to become a teacher would be more than a test. And going back to the idea of what that might look like after discussion. So we had a good discussion about that. The committee plans to bring that discussion to the board on this topic at a future meeting, maybe not in October because we need to do a little bit more conversation as committee members before we do that, but it will be coming to all of us. Questions? Yep.
This is a topic I know only enough to be dangerous, and so I apologize, but I know that when our president asked us at the beginning of the year what were our goals, that we wanted to see accomplished, I just based on what I'd read and what I look, in terms of who our teachers are and who our leaders are, who are superintendents, et cetera, that we don't see the kind of diversity that we see in our population in our state, represented in those jobs. And so I have asked questions about the praxis, and I'm just kind of curious. So anyway, I had mentioned that pathways to certification was of interest to me, even though I don't know enough about the topic. But when you say we're going to be discussing it as a board, is there an ultimate direction or goal in mind that we're thinking about, or would you rather wait and comment on that?
No, I think that's an excellent question. As chair, when I think about, this would have been between 2 and 3 years ago. By the way, the staff has been working on different things behind the scenes for diversity in the classroom and counseling. But when it's been long enough ago, I don't remember the exact statistics, but say if 750 people took the praxis test and the number of people that didn't pass by this much in one category, of those, 20% were the diversity that we need in the classroom. And so when the governor turned down the proposal that if somebody's down in just one area, not taking a composite score, but just looking at one area when they did really well here, we lost out on opportunities. So that will be part of this discussion, getting diversity in the classroom, in education, counseling, that will be looked at. So there's a lot of pieces. So the end goal is to do what's best for all kids, which includes the diversity, getting more people in the teacher workforce, and we have shortage of teachers. So there are several goals. So Commissioner, would you like to add to that?
Is actually refer back to the legislative committee report and the specific regulatory language. And so what we've been working on as a staff is actually aligned with what's in there. And I think to the point that we had conversations on yesterday, we're probably delayed due to COVID on some of these fronts, but our staff has actually continued that work. We've engaged with our teacher prep institutions on these strategies. What I don't want us to get fixed on, and I guess we discussed it a little bit, is don't get fixed on the praxis, because that was one solution, and I'm just going to tell you, I helped lead us down that path a little bit, because I thought, well, that's one small thing that we can do. And I think where I need the board is helping on the kind of the overall vision and the perspective on that. And then as the staff does that and comes up with strategies that we can change that program to, that way you don't get fixated on maybe the minute details, and we can do some of that. But I do need you to say, hey, look, this is the direction we want it to go. We want to see those changes. And very much like our strategic planning process, set out that big goal, which you mentioned already, that I want to make sure that we're doing that. And then some of the things that we put in to this, I think, are entirely right. What's our alternate non-traditional certification paths for teachers? How do we consider reciprocity between states? Because I think that's been one of our concerns. How do we eliminate barriers based on race and ethnicity, and kind of the accomplishment of the diversity that we'd like to see? And then also, and I think you'll see some of this in the budget again, but multicultural and how we shift that conversation as part of the overall dialogue. So again, that's what I hope we kind of keep circling back around to, and that's how I see that work continuing to move us forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. And like I said, that portfolio idea in combination with something else, I kind of liked, the Commissioner talked about that a little bit. So lots in the works towards one goal. And so thank you for asking that question. Anybody else have a question? All right, moving right along. I'm almost finished. This concludes the AQuESTT Teaching and Learning Committee report. And you already gave the update on the summative assessment conversation. So that concludes my report. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Patsy, would you provide a report from the AQuESTT Student Success, Access, and Support Domain Committee meeting?
Yes, I will. I want to make sure it didn't happen again. Okay, so the Committee on AQuESTT, Student Services, Access, and Support Domain, we met on September 3rd, 2020, and reviewed the contract for developing the equity scorecard, supporting resources and capacity building, trainings for NDEs, ESUs, districts, and schools, which was approved under the consent agenda today. And so I'd like a little bit to talk about what a scorecard is, in case some of you are wondering. I know that was a question that we asked. But a scorecard is a way for schools internally to evaluate their own equity successes and challenges. And it's not punitive in any way, it's not mandatory in any way, but it does allow the opportunity to spark great conversations about how schools are doing and what they can do to set goals for themselves to achieve equity and to celebrate their own personal successes as they do that. So that's what a scorecard is. And if you read about it in the consent agenda, and then we passed that today. The committee had one discussion item on leading for equity and excellence programs, state policy work for LEAP. I just finished sending in a report to LEAP about where we were in the process of our equity program for LEAP, and we seem to be doing pretty well. We had completed almost everything The one thing that we haven't done yet is stakeholder participation outside of our group of workers. But we have plans for that. We've been working on that, so we know that that's coming up. Okay. This second committee met on July 30th, and that committee, I want to say, is a very diverse committee. The committee represents teachers, a representative, there's a teacher, a parent, an ESU director, an administrator, there's racial diversity, there's LGBTQX, or LGBTQ plus, sorry, representation. So we were very careful about making sure that the people serving on this committee, our equity committee, was as diverse as possible. Do I believe it still could be more diverse? Yes. Also, 2 of our school board members participate, John Witzel and Deborah Neary, participate on that committee as well. And I'd personally like to thank them. They keep pushing me. Deb Neary's a great pusher, and I like that. That's an important thing to have. When you're talking equity, it's an important thing to have. Last week I was talking to her, and I said, just keep thinking and keep telling me what you're thinking, because what you're thinking helps me rethink things. So that's good. So this this 30th meeting, September 30th meeting group, put together, we took the NDE equity tool, which is the tool that helps us use the equity lens to make choices, and the NSEA tool, because they'd also worked really hard on a tool. And we asked the committee to take a look at those, and we gave them 2 scenarios that were educational and said, try to use these equity tools and the lens to make a decision about these problems in the scenario, and then evaluate the tools and tell us what you decided and why you decided that. And but more importantly, I think, and where we gleaned the most information, is that we asked this group to then take that that whole process and say, I would take this question from the NSEA tool and include it in your NDE one. I would get rid of this one. I would rephrase this one. So it helped us to take a look at the tool that we're creating and make it more workable. Is it finished yet? No, but it is so close now that I feel really good about it. And at the meeting I said, we're so close to being right where we need to be, so we have to work harder right now, because it's easy to give up in the end, especially on things like equity, where it seems like you might not ever be able to solve all the problems. So we reviewed those and the responses to that, and put it all together in the tool. The discussion also generated recommendations for the committee to consider, including the NDE non-discrimination and human dignity statement, developing policies focused on the advancement of educational equity, and attending professional development opportunities related to educational equity. I want to have the thing that was created out of this whole process. What happened is Zainab and I took all of the information and put it together, and the English teacher and me the speech teacher and me saw something visually that had happened that we did not realize had happened. And so I took it to Zainab, and Zainab made me explain it over and over again. So it's become a collaboration, of course. But this is what I call deductive reasoning, and it's used in writing and speaking, because you start with the big idea and you funnel down to the smallest idea. And so what had happened in the department here, that includes many of you, it's not just the equity committee, you've all been a part of this, the commissioner, everybody. So first of all, we are looking at the NDE non-discrimination and equity policy that the policy committee handed over to us and said, take a look at this and work with it. And Zainab, are you here with us too? Is she with us? Maybe not, okay. She's always so good too to work with. Anyway, so we created that, and then the equity lens, and we're not sure that all of this is in the right order yet or anything, but we're still working on that. The equity lens, and you as board members were part of that, and the AQuESTT committee, Student Success Committee, and Equity Committee was all part of creating that. And we have that now in front of us at every meeting. I guess we don't have it here, but darn COVID. Anyway, and then the commissioner's equity statement, when he told us these are the 6 commitments that we are going to make as educators, as a Board of Education, and that we would ask others to make concerning equity. He also provided a light that showed us the way as to where we needed to keep going. And then right now, the next month, we will be bringing the NDE equity decision tool to you and asking you to take a scenario and test it out and see what you think about it and offer us suggestions. And we're excited about that as well. And I think Zainab has some plans for having the staff also do that, a few members of the staff, not the whole staff. And then the equity tool is in progress with Lane and Lane Carr and Shirley Vargas, so you know it will be outstanding if they're working on it, and they'll be reporting to us soon. But as you can see, it's all funneled down. It started with a big idea, and now we're creating something not only that we can use and our staff can use and ESUs can use, but something that can be given to schools so that they can truly evaluate how are they doing, what are they doing well, and what do they need to work on. So this equity, this whole equity process, I mean, it's still not through, and I don't know if it ever will be, but it's still not through. But we have really taken a look at ourselves and what kind of guidance we're providing others in education. We've put the lens on ourselves, and then now we're turning it out to others so that they can see themselves better and know what they need to do better. It's been quite an experience so far, and I'm so excited to continue working on it with Zainab and the committee we have. I don't know if I should name the committee. You think I should? Okay, they've donated time to it and effort. I've already given credit to you, Deborah, and I want you to talk here in a minute too about something, but John Scretta, who happens to be an illustrious guest in this presence today, Deb Neary, Isao Matez from NSCA, John Heineman, Greg Keller, Bethany I can never remember her last name, Butane, I think it is, Rob McIntoffer, Zainab Rita, John Witzel, and Patsy Kojans. I'll ask if there are any questions about the report thus far. We're not done yet. We have a couple other things we want to talk to you about, but.
How many hours have you put into this, Patsy?
I don't know. When I thought of the funnel, I told Zainab that had come to me the night before while I was trying to sleep, so that we had to have some way to summarize where we had been and where we were going. So I have no idea, but I know Zainab's worked really hard, and I've worked really hard, and our committees have added. The committee of 10, 8 people responded with suggestions and ideas. That's a pretty good statistic. So there's a lot of care there. And I think one of the person didn't because of medical reasons, so. No questions? Okay, that ends my part of the report, but we have a recommendation for the state board that we'd like to present, and Deb Neary's gonna take that.
Thank you for that report and for your leadership, Patsy. You know, as I looked at this visual representation of the journey that we've been on, you know, that equity lens, when we first started talking about it, seemed like such a big step, and it really was, but we've come so much further than that. And and our plans to keep going, I just truly believe are so important. And I want to just commend, you know, Dr. Zainab Rita, Dr. Ryan Four, Dr. Matt Blumstead, everybody, and all my fellow committee members who have been on this journey. And because even though we've really made a lot of progress, and Dr. Shirley Vargas and everybody that's been involved in these discussions, but there's still so many exciting things that will be coming out. And you know, you made a joke about my over-enthusiasm. And I've really done a lot of soul searching about why is this topic, you know, really get to me. And you know, I hope in a good way that I'm an advocate for the right things, but you know, I've just thought back in my own personal journey, and I liked Robin's story last month, and so I'm going to share a little bit about mine. And I'll just say that, you know, I grew up around only white people. I didn't know anybody that looked differently than me. I didn't know anybody from a different religion or different orientation. I went to private school, and I mean, all my work career was all around white people. I mean, and I took a job then where I was focused on poverty issues. And I also had foster kids. I had, you know, African-American foster kids in my home, and I thought, you know, I've done my part for racism. And then I had, as part of some discussions like 15 years ago in training that I attended, and Ajamal, if you're out there listening, I just want to thank you because, you know, Ajamal Bindon, many of you know, he came into my home, and we had a really casual conversation, a small group of us, around racism and what that looks like. And he opened my eyes, and as I said, this was like 15 years ago, but in a way that had never happened to me before. And all of a sudden, I started seeing racism every single day. I started seeing microaggressions that I had never noticed before. And that light bulb went off for me in such a huge way. But since then, like, I've still been on a journey where, you know, I'd like to think that I've kept myself open to having people give me feedback about my biases, and a lot of my team members that I worked with have welcomed that and given me lots of good feedback about my biases that I've really taken to heart. And so it's been a journey for me to just look at my own self and, you know, how do I contribute to systemic racism that happens in our society without even knowing that's what I'm doing. And as we look at the pandemic, well, first I just want to say, you know, Matt and the NDE team they've been working on these issues for a long time, and I've just so loved for years, you know, the leadership that we've had from Dr. Blomstedt and from all of his team members, and looking at the subject and how can we do a better job in our education sector. And but we as board members, you know, it's such an important time right now. The pandemic has brought to light so many inequities that we kind of all knew were there, but now they're just front and center. And, you know, and also, you know, the George Floyd situation, you know, also helped us see in other sectors, you know, where are there some equity issues that need to be looked at. And I just feel like, you know, one more training on cultural humility isn't the answer, like for us. I think I am hoping that we can all take a training, and that everybody would be willing to join me in a training that really helps us look inward and helps us also try to make an effort to really understand the history of these systems and how we got to this place, so that we have new awarenesses about these systemic issues that surround us and ways that we as policy leaders can impact those. Because there's a lot that's already happening at the staff level, you know, with Dr. Blomstedt and his team, but what can we do as policy makers to help bring more equity to our education systems. And it is important for so many reasons, but also because Nebraska's, you know, our population is changing, our population trends, and we do really need to make sure that we have educators that look like the kids they're teaching, but also have leaders in our sector that look like the young people that we're educating. And so I just will throw that out. Sorry for the long, but if anyone else wants to comment on that, but I guess I'm just asking that you will be asked to participate in some kind of training, something lengthy, and we're looking at all the options right now. And so if anyone has ideas for training opportunities that you recommend, if you could get those to Patsy or our Dr. Zainab Rita, and, you know, so that we can look at them. But would love any other thoughts on that topic too.
I thought that most people understood why we need equity. And in talking to one of my constituents, was asked, why is equity such a buzzword? Mm-hmm. I was stunned. Why are we talking about this? And it made me aware of, your work is important, but it made me aware that we've got a long way to go if there are people out there with the tunnel vision thinking everybody has equal access to everything they need to get where they want to go. I mean, my heart's racing right now just thinking about, and I was very patient and explained, you know, why it was needed, and they finally said, oh, so it's education, and what your work is doing is going to help people at school and beyond to keep this in the back of their minds, so that we're doing what's best for our students and teachers and schools and communities. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Deborah, for making that recommendation. Yes.
I'd just like to say, Deborah, thank you for your passion. We need more people like you. And I welcome the opportunity for further training, I feel like I've got a good concept of all of it, especially from an early childhood conference I was at a couple of years ago, where they talked about implicit bias. And I had to sit back and say, yeah, I do have some, and I've really worked hard on those. and I have family members that challenge me a lot on it. And I just always say, you need to look yourself in the eye when you cross through the door, when I'm in the room. And it's about respect. So I welcome this opportunity, and I hope that we can all be part of this growth.
I heard a very interesting idea the other day about systemic racism, and I thought of you right away, Deborah, but the idea, our country is based on the whole idea of majority rules, and there has been a majority for years and years and years, and that majority is changing. And that's upsetting and disturbing, and people are trying to figure out where they fit in to this system. And so it's a very interesting way to say, because of this change and maybe some power switching and that sort of thing, that people are uncomfortable and don't know what to do. And so that may be, I mean, we blame a lot of things and a lot of people for it, but it just might be the evolution of our country. And so in that evolution, we have to realize that it's almost like giving birth, that you hold your breath and you wait and you push. Deborah, you push. And the process will bring forth maybe an even better America. A better place to live will be born out of all of this chaos. So it might not be as negative as we think. So, okay. Anybody else? Robin, do you have anything to add?
Well, I do.
Uh-oh.
If you really want good training, just be in a committee with Patsy and Deborah. That's all the training you really need. I am now well-trained, and I came in pretty poor.
Yes, Rachel.
And I appreciate so much what your committee is doing. It's so important, the work that you do, and we keep moving forward. And I just want to emphasize the importance also of gender equity in this work as we move forward, especially in education, because I do think we have not promoted as much gender equity as we need to as well. We don't have many male elementary teachers as role models for our young tykes. You know, we don't have as many, we have more now than, 25 years ago, women in leadership roles in education in Nebraska. And so I think it's important that we keep thinking what you're doing, which is such a broad spectrum of equity, and that's so important for us to keep in the forefront. So thank you for your work.
Well, and if you look on the equity lens, that's included. And Robin, I believe you want to make a statement about one more recommendation about the equity lens.
Uh-oh, you're putting me on the spot here.
Right.
No, you're gonna have to cover for me because I'm not sure.
All right. So if you remember when we created the equity lens, I'm going to make this short, sweet, and to the point because I think it's a no-brainer that we add it. But we said that the list of marginalized people, and remember I justified that list by saying you must see yourself, just like a student must see themselves in the teachers that they have. And a kid, when I did a play, I wanted them to see themselves on that stage as an audience member. And so we said it was fluid, that this document was fluid and the group of people would change, that in a few years, something that was considered marginalized may not be, and we could take it off. But we may have to add some. And so Robin came to me with a suggestion quite a while back, and I said, let's wait till we get some more work done, and then we'll talk about adding or subtracting. But Robin suggested that we needed to add incarcerated students to this process of the equity lens, and I agree with him. And do you want to justify it? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right, so, the justification, I think, is the YRTCs, all the work you guys have been doing with that. And we had lots of questions in our group before we ever started this equity process about how do kids, what do they learn, what's their curriculum, how are they graded, how's information transferred from one school to another, are they getting the same education? So I think it's a very good one to add. And so I don't know that we have to have any big formal process to do that, but I think we can add it. Okay? All right. Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity. This completes the report of the AQuEST Student Success.
Well, thank you,
Access.
Patsy.
Yeah.
Thank you for your committee. I'm going to hit the pause button for a few minutes for us to take a short break, no more than 10 minutes, and we'll be back in session. Okay. Continuing on, agenda item 6.6. Patsy, please provide a report from the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. We are keeping you busy today.
Yes, you are. And really in one of my area of expertise, numbers. Okay. I have learned a lot, though, having served on this committee. So at any rate, actually, the Budget Committee report is going to come from Jen Udemark. Is she here? Mm-hmm.
My name's Jen Udemark. I'm with the Office of Budget and Grants Management with the department. And so, yes, we're going to spend a little bit of time, I was going to say this morning, but it's becoming this afternoon, talking about the budget and the budget that we'd like to propose to legislature. The first kind of affirmation that I had today after kind of listening to the conversations for the past few hours was, you know, this whole time, I don't know that anybody's realized that you've been talking about the budget the entire time. A lot of the words that I've heard align with what we have in the budget today or the requests that we are making today with the budget. So such items as I just kind of had made some notes. We touched on Perkins, multicultural, early education, AQuESTT, assessment, accountability, equity, equitable opportunity, equitable success. The list just goes on. And so really, that's a lot of what we have in our budget today and what we'll go through. The other reason that we're kind of just going to do a quick review of the budget, the components of the budget, is this is an action item that's on our agenda, and this is asking for the to authorize the commissioner to submit an approved biennial budget to legislature. And I just want to take a moment to thank you for giving me the time to review this. If I could have just a volunteer in case there's any questions to just let me know as I go through this, so that I don't miss any opportunity to ask any questions, just let me know. I'm going to transfer over into sharing my screen. Can you see that now? Just the title page of the presentation? Okay, perfect. So kind of as I said, this is going to just be a review of the departments. It's essentially the executive summary is what it's called, and it's for the 2021 through 2023 biennial budget request. Oh, hold on. Okay, there we go. So the first slide is a little bit overwhelming at first glance, and you're probably thinking, wow, we are really jumping into this budget really fast. But what you're looking at, or what's in front of you at this moment in time, is what we will discuss and what we'll review and what we're building up to from the start to the finish. So you're actually seeing the last slide first. And I just want to highlight a couple areas so that you can kind of holistically, as we go through the parts and pieces, understand the components a little bit of what we're reviewing. Initially, when we start to build a biennial budget request, it's kind of like building a house. We start from the ground up. We start with the foundation, and that foundation is essentially our base budget or the current year's appropriation from legislature. So the left gold box, or excuse me, the gold box in the lower left corner, this is our current appropriation that we will build from. So this is a level of funding as far as what we know today that we will have in the upcoming biennium. And that budget base starts at $1.7 billion. And then what we do is then we add on increases or requests for additional funding. Those are called issues. And that really is all the data that you see in the middle of the screen are the requests for additional funding. And those requests could fall into a couple of categories, which is operations and flow-through aid. And then we also have enterprise issues or requests for the salary and health insurance increases. Now, as we talk about the budget today, we are taking that base budget, we're adding on these additional funding requests to come to the total biennial budget that we will submit. And I just wanted to touch on a few of what that growth looks like as we kind of walk through to give a little perspective. The biennial budget requests, once we add the base and add the additional funding, in total, we're asking for a 6.5% increase in funding for this upcoming biennium. We're also asking for an 11% increase in full-time staff, a 10% increase in PSL, and PSL really is just a cap on the level of salaries that are allowed within the budget. And then the last three items, these are the funding components. General funds is asking for a request, 3% increase in funds. Cash funds is asking for a 0.1% increase. And federal funds, we are asking for an 18.5% increase. And we'll talk a little bit more about those as we go through this the presentation and the content of the budget requests. But this was just a quick stop to see just the idea of how the budget works. We take a base that we know we have, the funding we have, we ask for additional funding, and those two together add up to the request that we'll be asking for the upcoming biennium. So the first we're just going to start off again with that base foundation, the starting point, and just create a quick landscape of what our budget looks like. So you can see where our funding is coming from at this point today. And so as I mentioned, the base budget is $1.7 billion. The largest portion of the funding is general funds, which are state revenues, and that's 76% of our budget. The next level of funding is 23% is the federal funds. And federal funds are funds that we receive or been granted from the federal level, and we receive this from the U.S. Department of Education, Agriculture, and Health and Human Services. These funds are all generated through grants that we receive from the federal government. Next, we have cash funds, which is 0.92% of the budget. And the cash funds that we receive are given or appropriated to the department for a specific purpose. And the funds are generated from specific fees, like fees from teacher certification or the sales of lottery tickets. And the last is the revolving fund. This is 0.12% of the biennial budget. And this really is just an accounting function. We won't talk about this too much. This is just essentially sales of services internally. When we pass things between office to office within our agency or from agency to agency, we will transfer those funds through the revolving. This is not a generation of new funds at all. So we're going to continue on a little bit on the activities or the categories of expenditures that occur within our state's budget, within our agency's budget. And those two areas are, we have flow through aid and operations. We're going to talk about the flow through aid first. Flow through aid is 95% of that 1.7 billion. It is actually, it represents 1.6 billion of the total budget. Flow through aid is funding that is provided to the schools, to the districts, to ESUs, educational partners. They are the recipients of the 1.6 billion. And it is mostly funded through general funds or state funds. You'll often hear it called as or referred to as state funds at 79% or about 1.2 billion. Now, of that 1.2 billion, just to put some perspective, TIOSA, the school funding formula, takes up about 1.1 billion of that general funding. The other largest contributor in flow-through aid is the federal funds at 20%. And again, those are funds that flow through to the educational entities through grants, and those can be all types of grants. Those could be competitive or discretionary, but there's many, many types. The other side or categories of expenditures that we have are operations. And operations, you can see is just that little blue square at about 5% of the 1.7 billion. Operations is funded at 82 million and is largely funded through federal funds at 63%. And then next, its largest proportion is general funds at 32%. Operations is used to provide the employee salary and benefits, and 54% of those operations, 54% is that goes to salary and benefits is for 549 full-time staff. The other 40% of the operations is just known as basic operations. That 46% could be travel, rent, procurement of services, purchasing of items, all fall into that category. The last view that we're going to just take a quick look at is to look a little bit at what the budget delivers in most, and specifically the services that are provided through the agency. So we still have, the budget still delivers the 1.7 billion. I have that yellow note on the bottom that basically is just saying I have removed the 1.6 billion of flow-through aid. And the reason being is if I were to chart that, of course, the aid would represent almost everything, and it would be very hard to see the 82 billion from the operations and the services that are provided. And so focusing a little bit on that, I'm just going to move counterclockwise. The largest portion of the operations is provided through K through 12 administration at 55%. It also provides 28% of those operational funds goes to vocational rehabilitation. Next, at 11% is disability determination services for disability benefits. And then both at 2 and 3% are the services for deaf and hard of hearing and the blind and visually impaired. And the last proportion of our operations is for educational innovation. Those are the lottery dollars, mostly provides for grants for innovation as well as innovative resources for the districts, ESUs. So we've kind of spent a few minutes talking about that base, the base allocation, the base budget, the starting point or the appropriations or funding levels that we know we have as of today and will continue to receive going forward in the biennium. The next that we're going to talk about is the additional funding that we're asking for or the additional funding that we're requesting. And so leadership has spent some time with discussing strategic planning, discussing the challenges, the efforts that the agency would like to support. And in that, typically we would have a list of requests for funding that could range from 15 requests, 20 requests. This year, it's a brand new launch of a new idea or a new way of doing this, which we've taken all the issues, selected priority issues, and have placed them into 5, kind of quote unquote packages or 5 buckets, and that either entertain and support an activity. And I think in thinking about this, it's really worked in a good way, essentially, because we do have many offices supporting a priority or supporting an activity. And so this really has, brought all the efforts together into single issues and working collectively. So the first issue is advanced early literacy. The next one is school improvement. We also have increased operational capacity, early childhood workforce transformation, and then the last package is education finance. So when we asked for the when we request these issues, I say additional funding, I just want to point out that the actual request could be an increase or a decrease. And that what happens after that point is it becomes a decision point for the governor and for legislature. And so the next thing we're going to look at are the 5 priority packages that will become the decision point for the governor and for legislature. The first one is the first priority issue is advanced early literacy. And this is a request for funding to support the implementation of system-wide early literacy programs and practices. There's a goal that every student would be able to read at or above grade level by grade 3. Advanced early literacy is supported by the Nebraska Reading Improvement Act, as well as the Nebraska Reads Initiative, which essentially encompasses best practices and also the adoption of high quality materials. Now, this request is for general funds, so state revenues. For fiscal year 2022, the ask is for $5 million. That would support training in the science of reading, the implementation of high quality material, as well as teacher preparation programs. The second year, or phase 2 of 2023, is a request of $10 million, and that at that point would be to sustain the activities that have already been implemented, the practices, the programs, and then deploy the literacy coaching networks, as well as the tools and resources for families, caregivers at home. I do have listed on here that this is essentially led by the Teaching, Learning, and Assessment Office, but we also have other collaborators that are also helping support the accountability, early childhood, special education. And so that's where kind of these packages is we are, working collectively as an agency to give more of a holistic support to essentially provide the best implementation that we can from the agency. The next, we got a little bit on the idea of calling them buckets yesterday, so I'm stuck on that a little bit. The next priority issue or the next budget bucket is school improvement. And under school improvement, we know today that we have state appropriations that are provided for measuring student and school performance, which we call assessment. This issue is asking or requesting capacity and funding to act upon those findings and provide this systemic targeted improvement to increase student achievement outcomes. We're asking the state to protect its financial investment that it has placed in assessment, which is around $8 million today, by recognizing the responsibility and accountability for creating, improving, and sustaining these learned outcomes once identified through assessment. Really, it's seen as a, you really need both to provide the success and outcomes rather than just identifying. The school improvement package is also asking for general funds for about $2 million for both biennium years. And this is for administration and operations to provide the comprehensive support and improvement for schools, and as well as support our investment in AQuESTT and the priority schools as well. And I think of today, in our earlier conversations, there had been the mention of assessment, AQuESTT, accountability, YRTC. So that's where a lot of the conversations that you're engaging in is where you can see those identified challenges, the priority pieces, and the strategic investments that the agency would like to invest in as well as protect. You can see that through these requests in funds to legislature. The next issue is increased operational capacity. And this one really was I don't want to call it a catch-all, but it collected up a few items, 7 specifically, that really fit into the area of just some housekeeping, And also just essentially at the end of the day is, besides just the services that we provide, we want to make sure that we're maximizing and being most efficient with the dollars that we're receiving, and that we are receiving every dollar that we potentially have available to us, and can provide, to the schools and the districts and the ESUs as well. So the first item is essentially we are asking to provide, or asking for the legislature to provide, additional general funds, additional federal funds, as well as some the personal service limitation, the PSL. So the first item was new federal grants awarded. What this essentially is every year we have new grants. I call it new grants, but they have a term, like a 3-year term or 1-year term. Every year for one of those, we have to go ask for those federal awards. So if we were awarded $100 at the federal level, then we need to have legislature appropriate us those. Essentially, they're not providing the funds. What they're providing is the spending authority, and we're asking for that spending authority. Under those new federal grants awarded, we do have the CARES Act funds for the ESSER and the GEARS funds, which were provided for the emergency relief due to COVID. And so that really obviously is a high need for the agency, that we know that we have been awarded between those two funds $80 million to provide to the districts. But without this approval from legislature, we are unable to spend those funds. The next is just the ability for the department to hire the most cost-effective staff. We're asking for PSL at this point, which I mentioned. There's a cap, and we would like to just increase that cap so that essentially when we are faced with a decision to hire a new staff member, whether we're contracting or whether we'd like to do it as an FTE, that we can be most cost-effective about it. The next is another housekeeping item for net increase of PSL required to pay vacation and sick leave payouts for retiring staff. When an individual retires after 40 years of employment or whatever length of time, there may be some payout, and that payout also requires PSL. So we have a point in time where we have an increase of staff that is eligible to retire, and so we would just like to receive that net increase on PSL. Number 4, under the increased operational capacity issue, is very similar to the number 1. Same thing, we have federal grants that are awarded. These are continuous grants. So these are grants that we receive year after year after year after year. Title I, Perkins, homeless, IDEA. Those would be continuous grants that we have an additional $7 million that we could be providing to the districts, but we do not have the appropriation at the state level. And so we're again asking for that just increase in appropriation, not technically funds, but the authority to spend. We also have DDS, the Disability Determination Services, that has received a federal allocation for 26 new adjudicator trainee positions. Again, anytime we're talking about federal allocations, federal awards, and federal funds, we are not asking the state legislature for the funds. We're just asking for the spending authority. This is the same type issue. In order for us to hire those 26 new adjudicator trainee positions, then we have to be able to have the spending authority to do so. Number 6, I think, would be very familiar to many, whether you're in education or not. The department has recognized that it is essential and critical for us to start developing modernization and mobility, a modernization and mobility infrastructure. And so we were asking for some IT staff to help support this infrastructure, which essentially is significant digital transformation and operational changes that have been implemented as a result of COVID, as a result of the new normal, and also as a result of our aging legacy IT systems. And the very last request is annualization of LB 965. This provided the agency with a part-time individual through special education for some services for the deaf and hard of hearing. This is just a timing issue with legislature. We just have to recognize and ask for this increase in funding. Otherwise, we will not receive it, even though the bill already appropriates for it. And so the high level, and I won't spend too much time in kind of the weeds here, but the high level ask for FY22 for all of this increased operational capacity is about 71 million. What I'm just kind of looking here, but when you look at the split here between what's general funds at about 600,000 and the federal funds of the 71 million, the 71 million is really flow through aid to the school districts. It's either in the form of grant funding, or it's in the fund of, I would say, digital resources that are being provided. And so really that is what the large makeup is, and then also the federally funded adjudicators. So the ask from the state funding is around $600,000, which covers essentially the modernization and mobility infrastructure. Yes. Yes. Sure, go ahead.
To understand what would be a situation where the legislature might not allow us to spend money that's been granted to us? I can't imagine.
That's a good question.
Why would that happen?
That's a good question. So it, I don't want to say that this is more a logistical item. You're right. We do have, there are two avenues that you can request these funds. One is called legislatively, which that's what this would be, the request through our budget. I would say DAS, or Administrative Services, finds that it's important for us to make these requests and for legislature to see the grant activities that are coming through our agency, the new grant activities that are in this situation, the new grants that have been awarded to the agency, that it is good informational items for legislature to not only have awareness of, but also to put, like you said, could take a vote on that. Now, let's say they did not pass this. We also have what's called administratively, is how they say it. We would ask for these additional appropriations administratively. And this is when we go through the administration over the Department of Administrative Services, and we would ask for these increases in that capacity. So you're right, we do have two avenues that we could pursue. The difference is administratively, we would wait till that day comes when we need it. In doing this action, we can ask for it a little further in advance and incorporate it into the biennial budget, and be a little more forward thinking, and projections and all that kind of good stuff. Could include this information now instead of waiting till the day that it does come. Does that help?
Very much so. Thank you so much for explaining that. It seems a little backwards that you'd even have to go through the administrator. When you need the money, let them have it. We're 48th in the nation paying for our schools, so.
Yes,
anyway.
I would agree. Yes, I mean, and that's a fair observation. It's a preference, and we're just trying to honor that request, and make sure that we're doing our due diligence in what's been asked of us. But yes, we do have the both options.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking. Our fourth priority issue, this had come up a little bit in our conversations, was the early childhood workforce transformation. And this one is, I call it a package. It's kind of a package in itself. Essentially, this is a request to provide state funding, so this is general funds, for the NDE to lead and transform Nebraska's early childhood workforce, with the purpose to improve child outcomes, reduce spending on later remedial schooling, as well as social services costs, and also growing Nebraska's economy. This what do I say, this not project, but this initiative is intended to provide access to low-income residents that are underserved in areas of the state, living in very rural or concentrated urban centers. It is also looking to assist persons of color, persons of culture, and ethnic minorities, as well as others who have not traditionally had access to higher education to obtain college degrees. So the early childhood workforce transformation would be led through the Office of Early Childhood. And so in FY22, we're asking for approximately $800,000 for administration and operations, for grants that would build upon the success of the Teach Early Childhood Scholarship Program. And that scholarship program is for low-income individuals who are working in early childhood education. And it then would also take and build off that and expand on the wages program, which then would provide stipends for low-income individuals who are remaining in the position. Then the third part to this workforce transformation would also be to work collaboratively with 2 to 4 year degree granting institutions and start to establish the competency-based degree experience, and then as well create that transferable credits when you're going from a CDA to an associate or a bachelor's, that they're not having to redundantly take these same classes, but to allow transferable credits. And so that's about the high level for the early childhood workforce transformation, but is really building upon other, services and successes that have been already in the early childhood arena, but taking them and incorporating in them and building on them one step further. The last priority issue encompasses education finance. And we have three contributors from the agency. They're all asking for state appropriations of general funds as well. And the first one comes to us from the school finance and administrative services, who is asking for school funding policy research staff. This is the ability to essentially the school finance area wants the ability to provide leadership, data, and then historical support for policymakers. And this really started with the idea that we're recognizing legislation's impact by key legislative staff retirements, as well as term limits. This would allow the agency to really just retain the historical support for policymakers for legislation, as well as a lot of the data, evidence-based information is provided already through the agency. So the School Finance and Administrative Services is asking for administrative and operational costs of about $350,000 for each of the biennium years being requested. The next category or the next request is for costs to cover special education increased costs. Special education, we do know today, is a mandated program. The state funds about 49% of total expenditures in special education, and that these costs are not, the costs that are not reimbursed by the state then does become the district's responsibility. Since its implementation in 2013, the special education has not received any increased funding to support those increased costs. So what we have now is essentially the costs are increasing faster than the support. The Office of Special Education is asking for, in FY22, they're asking for $23 million. And in FY23, the ask is for $48 million. And all of this would be provided as aid or flow-through aid to the districts and the ESUs. The last component of the education finance package was mentioned a little bit earlier, and this is that Nebraska is the only state which does not provide categorical funding for the Perkins Grant. And so this ask is for a state match for the federal Perkins Grant, and that also to recognize that This is a key component for the vitality and sustainability of the state's comprehensive workforce and economic development. The Career and Adult Education Office is requesting a state match of 7.5 million per year, and this would also be provided as aid that would be passed through to the school districts and ESUs. And I believe there's some other educational entities as well that would be incorporated into that grant. These are all 5 of the issues, the prioritized issues. Are there any questions? I'm just going to kind of pause there for a moment, see if anybody has any questions before I move on about any of the packages. Okay, so we're going to return. Oops, I'm sorry. That, you know what, that is a good question. And I think possibly Commissioner Bloomstead, do you? I don't have a real in-depth knowledge.
Probably because we've always been unsuccessful in getting it from the legislature. I don't know.
I'm just trying to think who maybe has been present that's had some of those in-depth discussions.
I'll speak to it for 40 years in this arena.
Oh,
yeah,
wonderful.
Nebraska has never been able to put together a legislative agenda that provided any state funding that's dedicated towards career and technical education. And over time, other states have done so. Nebraska has lagged behind. So Nebraska currently is the only state that has not created a dedicated source of funding for career and technical education at the state level. That's where we are.
We need to put Robin on?
Maybe. I think it's somewhat embedded in that list. I mean, this is not the first time that there has been, even the department, since I've been on the board, there's been advocating for this by multiple groups for a long period of time. This just continues to show the need for advocating for that support.
And I think what we're trying to do in these set of packages is not just, I think it's better approach to highlighting the need for that. And we will get some energy, I think, behind this. I don't know about this next biennium for sure, but there's conversations with the state chamber and Blueprint Nebraska. We've been highlighting this need with those groups. So I hold out some hope. I don't know, history would not hold out much hope, but I do hold out that we shouldn't be, well, we are last in the nation, and I don't want to stay in that position. So,
yeah. That was a very good question, and you're right. It's an interesting discussion because the state in this type of a capacity would be reinvesting in itself, and so yes, we could see some value in definitely having that state match. Why we're the only state, it just sounds like like you said, we just need to keep bringing that to the arena. So I'm going to move on to kind of the very last slide that we started out with today. And just review a couple components here that we've kind of been discussing as we walk through the issues. Again, just a mention again that we started out with that base budget at 1.7 million. And we are asking for the increased funding in the 5 prioritized areas that we kind of had mentioned. And so I just wanted to now put a little more perspective on these percentages that we were originally speaking about in the beginning. There are more than 5 categories up here, and I've tried to break out a few of these so that I was able to highlight operations and aid. Just because they may each take a different path or may impact the numbers a little bit in a little bit different way. And so I actually have taken a few minutes this morning and, through our meeting was able to pull out a few more numbers that we can just highlight on as well. So I want to start out with this FTE increase of 58.6 additional staff. In totality, it's an 11% increase over the prior year's base budget. When you break this down a little bit though, 26 are are the federal adjudicators, which are federally funded. We're just asking for the authority to hire these staff. We're not asking for additional funds. Beyond that, though, out of the remaining, once you take off 26 of that out of the 58, 14 of those new staff, again, are through the new, we call the federal appropriation for new grants. And so 50% of those 14 are already employed with the agency. We call it new grants, but it's like a 3-year grant, and we have to go ask for this money every biennium. And so we have to ask for those positions as well. So again, those are some hires that are already within the agency. And none, actually, we will administrate the ESSER and the GEAR funds with no new staff. So what that leaves at the end of the day is our request at the end of the day is for 18 new staff to be generally funded. That equates to about 3% by the time we get down to that final number. But I also want to keep perspective on the idea of if we were to, we would love for legislature to approve every single issue. In reality, we probably will not receive all 58%, or excuse me, 58 of those individuals that we are requesting. So that's, but at the max, it would be an 11% increase in FTE. PSL, I'm not going to really spend much time on this. Again, this is just more of a housekeeping item. As we hire new staff, then we also need the PSL to adjust accordingly. And that's really all this is doing, is we need to adjust the cap on the salaries. The last 3 columns, though, I just wanted to touch on slightly. The general funds or the state funds that we are requesting, and I've left these separate, the enterprise issues separate, because sometimes they can skew a little bit the totals. So for FY 21-22, we are asking for 39 million. And I just wanted to place a little perspective on that. 22% of this 39 million would stay within the agency. Now, after the administrative aspects or the operational aspects, that 22%, at the end of the day, only 3% resides with the agency. All the other or remaining actually will be provided to the districts as a pass-through or resources for the districts and for the issues. So only 3% of this 39 million would stay within the agency. All the other would be flow-through aid that would eventually reach the district, whether it's a service provided, whether it's funding, because some of this has grants that do come through the general funds this way as well, or whether it's a resource that's being provided. So an example is, and I'm just going to, this is just very easy, and another reason I just left these separate was, so the advanced early literacy package. This is asking for all contractual services to provide or be provided, or purchased items to be provided to the schools and to the districts. No additional administrative costs were asked or requested to support essentially us administrating this activity. So that's where there's a little bit of perspective to put on that 39 million. Another one is the 30 million here for the education finance. That 30 million out of the 39 is all pass-through aid, again, to the school districts and the ESUs. But in totality, the ask is for a 3% increase in general funds or state revenue to the agency. Cash funds, I'm just going to skip over that. Those are salary and health insurance increases. The last is the federal. This is the largest of all, at an 18.5% increase. And again, just to, just keep in mind that we are not asking for 71 million. What we're asking for is we're asking to receive the spending authority and have the ability to spend the money that we have already been granted from the federal government. So all of this funding, 71 million, is already been awarded to the department to provide as grants and pass-through funding to the school districts and the ESUs. As I say, that's about the high level components of what our base budget looks like. What we will be requesting with an approved biennial budget request from the board. And then we will be doing that on September 15th, so in a couple weeks. And then the next point in time that we will see this information or start seeing some perspective from the governor specifically is, I believe, by February 1st, right? February 1st in that area, or I shouldn't say that, January 15th. Let me go back. The State of the State address, possibly. We will, then we'll start to see what is being supported, we could maybe see some approval on some funds. Is there any questions or any, just even items that you want further clarification on, or maybe I just didn't touch on enough before I
Lisa?
kind of pass?
Lisa? Jen?
Yes.
Under the operational issues on the far left, it says education finance operation. I kind of understand that, but my question is about the education finance aid. Can you give a little bit more clarification as to how that will work?
I'm just going to scroll up one slide. It happens to be the one right next door to this one. The aid is the request for the special education increased costs that has not received any growth since 2013 when it was implemented. It's just always remained the same level of funding.
That's only for special ed then, right?
That would only be for special ed state-funded reimbursement, correct? And this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The career ed funds too. I'm looking at the numbers, so I think.
Yep, correct.
Yep.
And then the other is the state match for the federal Perkins dollars at 7.5 million as well. And so that 23 million and the 7.5, I'm just going to scroll down again. That's what adds up to that 30 million.
Oh, all right. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, absolutely.
Robin, did you have a question?
First of all, thank you, Jen, for, I say, reducing 1,000 pages of information into 10 slides, so.
You were listening yesterday.
So thank you very much. And then just clarification. Okay, are we guaranteed the base budget of $1.7 billion?
That's a very fair question. As of today, kind of like I said, this year we have been appropriated the 1.7. So this year in 2021, we do not anticipate any changes to the current base. Now, I will say, never say never. I just mean I don't want to say it and then I could totally be wrong. We could go to this next legislative session, and when we do the deficit request issues, and so this legislative session is when we'll start talking about 2021. Right now we're hearing that revenue receipts are on track, no concern at this point. So we're not anticipating any changes to that base budget. Now,